My husband's entire family flew to Paris, leaving me alone to care for my comatose husband. The moment their plane took off, he suddenly sat up in his hospital bed, ripped the tubes from his throat, and said, "Come with me and get out of here, or everyone will die." I am Maya, 35 years old, and for the last 7 years, I thought I knew the man I married. I thought I knew his family. I am a commercial architect, someone who builds foundations for a living, but I had no idea the foundation of my own life was a deadly illusion. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been pushed to the edge by toxic in-laws and had to fight your way back in the dark. The ICU room on the fourth floor of Seattle General Hospital smelled of bleach and despair. I stood perfectly still by the cold glass of the window, my forehead pressed against the pane, looking down at the hospital drop-off zone. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the world outside, but it could not blur the sight of the black luxury SUV idling at the curb. Down there, my husband Julian's family was loading their custom leather luggage into the trunk. His mother Beatrice was adjusting her silk scarf, her face completely devoid of the tears she had performed for the doctors just an hour ago. Beside her was Calvin, Julian's father, barking orders at the driver with the same ruthless entitlement he used to run the family's real estate firm. Then there was Jamal, Julian's younger brother, checking his expensive watch, looking entirely bored by the inconvenience of his brother fighting for his life. And finally, Chloe, Jamal's white wife, who was busy taking a selfie near the hospital entrance, probably drafting some tragic caption about her family's unimaginable sorrow. I watched them climb into the car one by one. The doors shut heavily, sealing them inside their bubble of wealth and privilege, and the SUV pulled away, merging smoothly into the afternoon traffic. They were leaving not just the hospital, but the country. Julian had collapsed 3 days ago during a Sunday family dinner at Beatrice and Calvin's estate. One minute he was taking a sip of his bourbon, discussing a new property acquisition, and the next he was clutching his chest, gasping for air, and collapsing onto the hardwood floor. The doctors called it a sudden, unexplained cardiac event resulting in a medically induced coma to stabilize his brain function. They said it was a waiting game, but his family was done waiting. My phone vibrated in my pocket, pulling my attention away from the empty street below. I pulled it out, my fingers numb and trembling. The screen lit up with a notification from our family group chat. It was a message from Chloe. "Wheels up to Paris. We need this time to heal. Maya, keep us posted on when to pull the plug. Do not be selfish, let him go." I stared at the words, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of them punching the breath right out of my lungs. Let him go. My husband was 36 years old, healthy, vibrant, the CEO of his family's firm, and they were treating him like a broken piece of machinery. They were ready to write off for a tax break. I read the message again, my vision swimming with hot, angry tears. Chloe had not even bothered to call. None of them had. They had packed their designer morning clothes and booked first-class tickets to Europe, leaving me alone in a sterile room to make the decision to end my husband's life. This was how they had always treated me, though never with such deadly stakes. As an African-American woman who had built her career from the ground up, fighting for every commercial architectural contract and pushing through a notoriously male-dominated industry, I was never going to be good enough for Beatrice and Calvin. They came from old money, generational wealth built on corporate real estate development, and they viewed me as an outsider, a working-class girl who had somehow tricked their eldest son into marriage. I designed the very corporate headquarters they sat in every day. I drew the blueprints, pored over the structural integrity, and handed them a state-of-the-art masterpiece. But to Beatrice, I was just hired help who overstayed her welcome. To Chloe, who came from a wealthy family of political donors, I was a charity case she barely tolerated at holiday dinners. They hated that Julian loved me. They hated that he respected my mind, and now they were leaving me to carry the absolute heaviest burden a wife could ever bear while they drank champagne across the Atlantic. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the device against the wall and shatter it. How could they just walk away? How could a mother leave her son hooked up to a ventilator? How could a brother fly to Paris while his own blood was lying in a hospital bed? I turned away from the window and looked at Julian. He looked so small, surrounded by the towering medical equipment. The rhythmic mechanical hiss of the ventilator filling his lungs was the only sound in the room. Tubes snaked from his arms, his chest, his throat. His dark skin looked ashen under the harsh fluorescent lights. I walked slowly to the side of his bed and reached out, gently wrapping my fingers around his cold, unresponsive hand. "I am not pulling the plug," I whispered to him, my voice cracking under the weight of my tears. "I do not care what they say. I am not letting you go." I will stay here every single day until you wake up. You hear me? You have to wake up. The silence of the room was heavy, oppressive. I rested my head against the edge of his mattress, letting the tears fall freely onto the pristine white sheets. For the first time since the ambulance arrived at the estate 3 days ago, I allowed myself to feel the full crushing magnitude of my isolation. I was completely alone. Then something changed. It started as a subtle shift in the background noise. The steady, predictable beep of the heart monitor hitched. It skipped a beat, then doubled in speed. I lifted my head, wiping my eyes, confused by the sudden erratic rhythm. The numbers on the digital display above the bed began to fluctuate wildly. His heart rate spiked, his blood pressure readings jumped. "Julian," I said, stepping closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. His fingers twitched against my palm. Not a subtle, involuntary spasm, but a firm, deliberate squeeze. I froze, unable to breathe. The doctors had told me he was deep in a medically induced coma. They said he would not feel anything, would not respond to stimuli. But his grip on my hand tightened, strong and urgent. "Julian, can you hear me?" I pressed the call button frantically with my free hand, intending to summon the nurses. Before the chime even sounded in the hallway, Julian's eyes shot open. They were wide, bloodshot, and entirely alert. There was no grogginess, no confusion of a man waking from the edge of death. There was only sheer, unadulterated panic. His hands flew up to his face. Before I could process what was happening, he grabbed the thick plastic ventilator tube secured in his mouth and pulled. "Julian, stop! You need that!" I screamed, reaching out to grab his arms. He shoved me away with surprising force, ripping the medical tape from his cheeks and pulling the long tube from his throat with a sickening wet sound. The medical machines surrounding the bed immediately began to blare a cacophony of high-pitched alarms, signaling critical failure. He coughed violently, leaning over the side of the bed, gasping for natural air. He was pulling the IV needles from his arms, ignoring the blood that began to blossom across his hospital gown. "Julian, what are you doing? You are going to kill yourself," I shouted, terrified, trying to press his shoulders back down onto the mattress. "I need to get the doctor." He grabbed my wrist, stopping me in my tracks. His grip was like a vice, bruising my skin. He pulled himself upward, sitting bolt upright in the bed, his chest heaving as he fought for oxygen. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with an intensity that chilled me straight to the bone. He was not sick. He was not a man dying of a sudden cardiac event. "Maya," he gasped, his voice raw and gravelly from the tube. "Come with me and get out of here, or everyone will die." I stared at him, the alarm screaming in my ears, the reality of the room entirely shattering around me. The in-laws fleeing to Paris, the cruel text message from Chloe telling me to pull the plug, the sudden impossible resurrection of my husband. "What are you talking about?" I managed to whisper, my mind completely unable to grasp the situation. He swung his legs over the side of the hospital bed, his bare feet hitting the cold linoleum floor. He looked at the door, tracking the sounds of the approaching nurses running down the hallway. "They did not leave for a healing trip, Maya," he said, his breathing ragged but his words terrifyingly clear. "They are running, and if we do not disappear right now, the people they owe money to are going to come through that door and slaughter us both." He stood up, his knees buckling slightly, but he caught himself on the edge of the metal tray table. I stood frozen in place, my hands hovering in the air. The man I had married, the polished, composed CEO who wore bespoke suits and commanded boardrooms with quiet authority, was standing before me in a blood-stained hospital gown, acting like a fugitive. "Julian, you had a heart attack," I pleaded, trying to maintain some sense of reason in a situation that had entirely abandoned logic. "You collapsed at your parents' house. You have been in a coma." "I was not in a coma," he fired back, moving swiftly to the small hospital closet and pulling out the clothes I had brought for him days ago. "I was hiding. The doctor on call is an old friend from college. He administered a heavy sedative to make it look like a coma. It was the only way to buy us time." "Buy us time for what?" I demanded, my voice rising over the deafening mechanical alarms. The heavy footsteps in the corridor were getting louder. "For survival," he said, pulling his shirt over his head. I looked at the window, the rain still lashing against the glass. The luxury SUV was long gone, speeding toward the airport, carrying Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, and Chloe to safety across the Atlantic. They had told me to pull the plug. They had wanted me to end his life. Not out of mercy, not out of medical necessity, but because they needed him gone. A cold, horrific realization began to seep into my veins. The puzzle pieces of the last 3 days were shifting, realigning into a picture so sinister I could barely comprehend it. The rushed family dinner, the sudden collapse, the immediate refusal of the family to stay by his side, the aggressive insistence from Calvin that the company lawyers needed to draft medical power of attorney documents immediately. They knew. They knew exactly what was happening, and they had left me sitting in this chair, serving as the perfect grieving decoy while they escaped. The hospital room door handle clicked and pushed open. Julian grabbed my arm, his eyes dark and desperate. "We have to move Maya, now." The door handle clicks loudly, followed by the heavy jingle of security keys from the hallway. Julian yanks me into the small, sterile ensuite bathroom of the private ICU room. He throws the deadbolt just as the heavy wooden door of the main room swings wide open. We hear the frantic rush of rubber soles squeaking against the linoleum. Nurses are shouting codes, their voices echoing off the hard walls, panicked over a missing patient who was just on life support. I press my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream. Julian is leaning against the tiled wall, his chest heaving frantically, pulling his street clothes from the small plastic belongings bag I had brought days ago. "Julian," I whisper, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "What is happening? You just had a massive heart attack. You need a doctor." "I do not need a doctor, Maya." He breathes heavily, hastily pulling his slacks up over his bare legs. "I need you to listen to me carefully because we only have seconds. My family has been bleeding our real estate firm dry for the last 4 years." I stare at him in the dim, flickering light of the bathroom, my mind struggling to process the impossible situation. "Bleeding the firm, Julian. You are the CEO. You review the accounts." "I am the CEO on paper," he snaps, slipping into his dark button-down shirt. "But Calvin and Beatrice still hold the majority board seats. Jamal is the chief financial officer. Chloe runs the international acquisitions. I thought we were restructuring the commercial portfolio. I thought the commercial real estate market was just taking a hit. But I found the shadow ledgers last Thursday hidden on a secured server. They have not been restructuring anything. They have been embezzling." He grabs my shoulders, his grip desperate and bruising. The luxury cars, Chloe's ridiculous charity galas, Jamal's gambling debts, my parents' new massive estate in the Hamptons. They funded every single bit of it by draining the company's operating capital. And when the well ran dry, they went to the underground. The underground? The words sound absurd coming out of my mouth. "We are legitimate commercial developers. We deal with city planners and zoning boards, not the criminal underworld." "A syndicate," Julian says, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper as someone bangs on the bathroom door outside, shouting for us to open up. "They borrowed millions from a private, ruthless syndicate operating out of Chicago. And Maya, they used my personal assets as collateral without my knowledge. Our home, your architectural firm's seed money, everything we own." I feel the blood drain completely from my face as the horrific reality sets in. "You confronted them." I say, the pieces snapping together with terrifying clarity. "At Sunday dinner." Julian nods, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. "I told my father and Jamal I was calling in an independent forensic auditor on Monday morning. I told them I was going straight to the authorities. 30 minutes later, my mother handed me my favorite bourbon. Chloe made a joke about taking the edge off. Jamal patted my back. I drank it." He leans his head back against the cold tiles, closing his eyes. "It was not a heart attack, Maya. It was a slow-acting neurotoxin. They poisoned me in my own childhood home while smiling in my face. I remember that dinner vividly now." Beatrice had worn her expensive pearl necklace, humming a cheerful tune as she poured the drinks. Calvin had toasted to family values and loyalty. They sat around that massive mahogany dining table, laughing, sharing stories, watching Julian drink poison, drop by drop. It was not a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated execution orchestrated by the people who brought him into this world. The banging on the bathroom door grows significantly louder. A male nurse shouts that they are getting hospital security to break the lock immediately. "How are you standing here?" I demand, gripping his shirt collar, tears streaming down my face. "The doctors told me your organs were failing. They told me to prepare for the worst." "Dr. Sterling," Julian replies, opening his eyes. "He was the attending physician when the ambulance brought me in. He is my old college fraternity brother. He recognized the symptoms of a neurotoxin immediately because we had talked privately about the impending audit. He knew my family brought me in here to die. He flushed my system with an experimental counteragent, but the only way to keep them from finishing the job right there in the emergency room was to make them think they had already won. He placed me in a medically induced coma and restricted access to my chart while he treated the poisoning. My family was told only that my cardiac condition was catastrophic and that I remained deeply unresponsive. But why? I cry quietly, terrified. Why not just go to the police right then? Because we have no hard proof. Julian insists, pulling me closer. The shadow ledgers are locked on Jamal's physical hard drives at the corporate office. The syndicate's loan contracts are buried in Chloe's international shell companies. If I go to the police now, my parents will destroy the evidence, claim I had a psychotic break, and throw me in a psychiatric ward using their high-priced lawyers. But that is not even the worst part. He steps closer, his voice dropping to a deadly serious pitch. The syndicate is calling in the debt this week. If I die, a $30 million Keyman corporate life insurance policy owned by the company pays the death benefit directly to the corporation. My parents, Jamal and Chloe, control the board. They plan to redirect the entire payout the moment I was pronounced dead, use it to satisfy the syndicate debt, and walk away before anyone discovered what they had done. If I live and the syndicate does not get their money, they will not just take the company, they will slaughter my entire family to make an example, and they will start with you. The room spins. The gravity of the situation crushes the air entirely from my lungs. My mother-in-law, who critiqued my wedding dress and called my architectural degree a cute little hobby. My father-in-law, who lectured me on fiscal responsibility. My brother-in-law, who asked me to design his new summer home for free. They were willing to murder my husband for an insurance payout to cover their own disgusting greed. Dr. Sterling is waiting in the service elevator at the end of the hall, Julian says, checking his watch. He is taking me to an off-the-books medical safe house outside the city. The neurotoxin is still highly active in my system. My heart rate is erratic. I am barely holding it together, Maya. I need time to detox and recover fully. I am coming with you, I say, instantly reaching for the door handle. No. Julian says, blocking my hand with surprising strength. If we both disappear, they will know something is wrong. They will cancel the Paris trip, fly back immediately, and destroy the evidence before we can even blink. They need to believe their plan is working perfectly. They need to believe I am lying in that bed, slowly slipping away. I cannot just stay here, I plead, my voice breaking. Julian, they texted me from the runway. They told me to pull the plug. They want you dead. And you are going to play the part of the devastated, helpless wife perfectly, he says, cupping my face in his hands. His thumbs brush away my tears. You are going to sit by that empty bed. You are going to cry to the nurses. You are going to text Chloe and my mother and tell them how incredibly hard this is. And while they are sipping champagne and celebrating my murder, you are going to find a way into Jamal's office and steal those ledgers. The banging on the door stops. The heavy sliding of a master key echoes from the other side of the lock. There is a maintenance hatch above the ceiling tiles in here, Julian says, rapidly pointing upward. It leads directly to the laundry chute that drops to the basement level. Dr. Sterling left it open for me. Julian, please. I beg, terrified that the moment he climbs into that darkness, I will never see him again. I love you, Maya, he says, pressing a fierce, desperate kiss to my lips. Trust nobody. They will try to force your hand. Play the fool until you have the proof. With agility driven purely by adrenaline. Julian steps onto the edge of the bathroom sink, pushes the acoustic ceiling tile aside, and hoists himself up into the dark crawl space. He slides the tile back into place just as the bathroom door bursts open. 2 hospital security guards and 3 nurses rush into the cramped space. They find me sitting on the tiled floor, my knees pulled to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. It is not entirely an act. The sheer terror of what my husband has just revealed shakes me to my absolute core. Mrs. Brooks, one of the nurses says, kneeling beside me, her face pale with utter confusion. Where is your husband? The bed is completely empty. I look up at her through my tears, forcing my voice to tremble with perfect manufactured panic. I do not know. I went to the bathroom, and when I came out, he was gone. Please, you have to find him. He is so sick. The hospital descends into total chaos. A code missing patient is called over the intercom. Security locks down the floors, but I know it is too late. Julian is already gone, hidden away in a safe house, fighting the poison his own mother handed him. I am escorted back to the main waiting room, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, playing the role of the distraught wife perfectly. The police arrive to take my statement. A weary-looking detective asks if Julian had enemies. I look him dead in the eye and say that Julian is beloved by everyone, especially his family, who are absolutely crushed that they had to leave for Paris. The detective nods, writing down my lies as gospel truth. I tell them my husband must have wandered off in a state of extreme medical delirium. The lead detective assures me they are checking the cameras, but the service corridors and maintenance levels have significant blind spots, and hours pass without anyone locating Julian. To the hospital and the police, he remains a critically ill patient who somehow disappeared during a chaotic emergency response. Sitting alone in the sterile waiting room, staring at the vending machines, The shock begins to wear off, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. My in-laws, the people who had looked down on me for being a working-class black woman from the south side of Chicago, had tried to murder the only man who had ever truly seen my worth. They had used my hard-earned architectural money to back their illegal debts. My phone vibrates in my pocket. It is another message in the family group chat, this time from Beatrice. Maya dear, we have landed in Paris. The flight was exhausting. Have the doctors given you a timeline on Julian's passing? We need to make arrangements with the firm's legal team regarding his life insurance before the weekend. Do be a dear and cooperate with Chloe's instructions. I stare at the glowing screen. They were not even trying to hide their eagerness to collect the $30 million insurance payout. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a grieving, hysterical widow who would blindly sign whatever papers they put in front of me. They forgot that I am an architect. I build massive structures from the ground up, which means I know exactly how to tear them down to the studs. I wipe the remaining tears from my face and type my response, ensuring my tone conveys nothing but absolute compliance. I understand, Beatrice. Please tell Chloe to send whatever she needs. I just want Julian to be at peace. I hit send, locking my phone's screen. The question is no longer why my husband woke up. The question now is how do I keep my husband dead to the world while finding the hard proof to completely obliterate my own family. I stare at the sent message on my phone, the digital glow illuminating the dark corners of the hospital waiting room. The detectives have finally stopped asking questions, satisfied with my fabricated story of a medically delirious husband wandering out into the stormy Seattle night. Dr. Sterling walks past me a few minutes later, his face a mask of professional exhaustion. He hands me a paper cup of lukewarm black coffee. As I take it, my thumb brushes against a small folded napkin tucked beneath the cup. I wait until he disappears down the corridor before unfolding it. Written in hurried black ink is a single unmarked address and the word secure. Julian made it. He is alive, he is out of their immediate reach, and he is safe. Now my performance truly begins. The drive back to our house is a blur of rain-slicked streets and blinding headlights. When I unlock the front door and step inside, the silence of our home hits me like a physical blow. Julian's shoes are still neatly lined up by the entryway. His favorite coat hangs on the rack. Just a few days earlier, before that Sunday dinner shattered everything, we had been standing in this very hallway, discussing paint colors for the nursery we were finally ready to design. Now he is fighting off a deadly neurotoxin in a hidden medical bunker, and his family is flying across the ocean on blood money. I sink into the living room sofa, pulling a woven throw blanket tight around my shoulders to stop my body from shaking. I pull out my phone again. The silence of the house is deafening, so I open a social media app, needing to see exactly what kind of monsters I am dealing with. I navigate to my mother-in-law's profile. Beatrice has always treated her social media like a digital country club, a carefully curated exhibition of generational wealth and untouchable status. Her latest post, uploaded just an hour ago from a first-class lounge in Paris, makes my stomach turn violently. The photograph shows Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, and Chloe standing on a private balcony with the glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower behind them. They are all holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Beatrice is wearing a custom black morning dress that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. Chloe is leaning into Jamal, offering the camera a practiced, sorrowful pout. The caption reads, "Finding peace and light amidst our family's darkest tragedy. Sometimes you have to step away to heal the broken pieces of your heart. Please respect our privacy during this unimaginable time." I stare at the image, sickened by the absolute perfection of their performance. They are celebrating. They are toasting to a successful murder. Beatrice always made sure to remind me of my place. From the moment Julian brought me home to meet his parents, she made sure I knew I was an outsider. A working-class black woman from the south side of Chicago, with a public school education and a demanding career, simply did not fit her vision of a suitable wife for her golden boy. She wanted Julian to marry someone like Chloe, someone with political connections and trust funds, someone who understood the ruthless game of corporate legacy. Beatrice never bothered to understand that my architectural degree was earned through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. To her, I was just a temporary distraction. Now she is using her son's supposed impending death as a photo opportunity to garner sympathy from her wealthy socialite friends. A sharp ping from my phone snaps me out of my thoughts. It is a direct text message from Chloe. Before I open the message, I already knew why they were contacting me instead of simply taking control themselves. 3 years earlier, when Julian completed a major corporate succession review, he had formally designated me as his temporary healthcare surrogate and emergency voting proxy if he ever became medically incapacitated. It had seemed like routine estate planning at the time. Another stack of documents we signed and placed in a secure file. Now those signatures were the only barrier standing between his family and complete control of the company. As long as Julian remained incapacitated, I held limited authority to protect his voting interests and make certain emergency decisions on his behalf. I could not sell his shares or rewrite the company however I pleased, but neither could Jamal simply seize them. That was why they needed my signature. They were not asking me to create authority for them. They were asking me to surrender the authority Julian had already entrusted to me. My sister-in-law has always spoken to me with a sickly sweet condescension, masking her deep-seated jealousy behind fake smiles and backhanded compliments. The message includes 3 heavy PDF attachments. Maya, I know you are completely overwhelmed right now, the text reads. The hospital bills are going to be astronomical, and we know you do not have the liquid capital to cover Julian's specialty care. Jamal and Calvin had our corporate lawyers draft these documents to take the burden off your shoulders. Just sign the delegation forms transferring your temporary medical and corporate proxy authority to Jamal. We will handle all the debt and make the hard decisions for you. Do not stress yourself out trying to understand the legal jargon. Just sign where the tabs are highlighted and email them back by morning. I opened the PDF files, my architect's eye scanning the dense paragraphs of legal text with trained precision. I read contracts for a living. I dissect municipal zoning codes and commercial building regulations every single day. I know exactly what I'm looking at. They are not simply asking me to delegate the temporary medical proxy. Embedded deep within the secondary clauses is an attempt to convert my limited emergency authority into a permanent transfer of Julian's corporate voting rights, access to his personal assets, and authorization to liquidate our joint accounts. If I sign this, I hand them the keys to everything we own. I hand them the authority to legally disconnect Julian from life support the moment they decide the charade has gone on long enough. They are disguising a total hostile takeover as a favor to a grieving, incompetent widow. Before I can even formulate a response, my phone begins to ring. It is an international number, Beatrice. I take a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow. I need to be the exact person they expect me to be: weak, exhausted, and easily manipulated. I answer the call, letting my voice crack perfectly on the very first word. Hello? Maya, darling. Beatrice says, her voice echoing slightly over the international connection. You sound absolutely dreadful. Have you been crying this entire time? You really must compose yourself. I cannot help it, Beatrice, I say, letting the soft sob slip through my lips. The police are looking for him, but the storm is so bad. I am so scared. Well, hysterics will not bring him back to his hospital bed. She sighs, the sharp edge of disapproval cutting through her fake sympathy. This is exactly why Calvin and Jamal stepped in to handle the legalities. You are far too emotionally unstable to be dealing with hospital administrators right now. Chloe sent you the documents, did she not? She did, I whisper, rubbing my eyes. But it is so much paperwork. I do not understand why Jamal needs full control of Julian's shares just to pay a hospital bill. The line goes quiet for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to know I struck a nerve. When Beatrice speaks again, her tone is venomous, stripping away the polite mother-in-law facade. Listen to me very carefully, Maya. You are an architect. You draw pretty pictures of buildings. You do not understand high-level corporate finance, and you certainly do not understand the pressure Julian has been under. Frankly, we all knew this was coming. Your demanding career, your constant need to prove yourself in a man's world, it stressed him beyond his limits. A man of Julian's stature needs a supportive wife, a peaceful home, not a woman constantly competing with him. You pushed his heart to the breaking point. The very least you can do now is step aside and let his real family clean up the mess you helped create. Sign the papers, Maya. Do not make us take this to court. She is blaming me. She poisoned her own son, and she has the absolute audacity to blame my career for his cardiac collapse. The rage that flares inside me is hot and bright, a consuming fire that threatens to burn through the phone line. I want to scream at her. I want to tell her that I know exactly what was in that bourbon. I want to tell her that Julian is alive and that we are going to bury her under a federal prison. But I swallow the fire. I choke it down, transforming it into the perfect weapon. They need to believe they have broken my spirit. They need to feel invincible. You are right, I sob, forcing my voice to tremble with devastating defeat. I am so sorry, Beatrice. I just want him to be at peace. I cannot fight anymore. I will look at the paperwork tonight. I will sign whatever you need. Good girl, she says, her voice immediately returning to a sickeningly sweet purr. We will handle everything from here. Get some rest, Maya. The line clicks dead. I slowly pull the phone away from my ear. The tears on my face dry, instantly replaced by a cold surgical focus. I toss the phone onto the sofa and walk over to my large drafting table in the corner of the living room. I turn on the bright overhead lamp and unroll the massive detailed blueprints of my in-laws' corporate headquarters. I designed every single square inch of that building. I know the thickness of the drywall, the routing of the ventilation ducts, and the exact placement of every security camera. I know that Jamal's executive suite has a secondary access panel hidden behind the custom oak bookshelves I installed 3 years ago. I agreed to review their paperwork, but they are never going to see my signature. I know exactly what I need to do. I need to break into the family's corporate headquarters tonight, and I am going to rip their empire apart from the inside out. The rain was coming down in thick, freezing sheets by the time I pulled my car into the underground parking garage of the corporate headquarters. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel while listening to the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers. I had designed this building from the ground up. I poured 2 years of my life into the structural integrity, the load-bearing walls, the flow of the executive suites, and the sleek glass facade that currently reflected the Seattle skyline. Julian was so incredibly proud of me when we cut the ribbon. His parents smiled for the cameras, happily taking all the credit for my long nights and meticulous calculations. Tonight, the beautiful building I created was going to give me the keys to their complete destruction. I checked the passenger seat. My leather tote bag held my laptop, a high-speed encrypted cloning drive Julian kept for emergencies, and a small flashlight. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my black trench coat. I needed to look the part of the shattered wife. I wiped away my perfectly applied makeup, letting a few residual tears smudge my mascara. I slumped my shoulders, letting the sheer exhaustion of the past 3 days weigh down my posture. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw exactly what the world expected to see: a grieving widow coming to collect the last fragments of her dying husband's life. I walked out of the garage and into the grand marble lobby. The echoing click of my heels felt unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. The night security guard, an older man named Marcus, looked up from his desk monitor. Julian and I always made sure to bring Marcus a plate of hot food from the corporate holiday parties when the rest of the family completely ignored his existence. When he saw my face, his professional demeanor instantly softened into genuine sorrow. "Ms. Maya," he said, rushing out from behind the imposing security desk. He kept his voice low and respectful. "I heard the terrible news about Mr. Julian. I am so incredibly sorry. We are all praying for him." "Thank you, Marcus," I whispered, letting my voice waver perfectly. I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue. I know it is terribly late, but I could not sleep. The hospital is so cold, and the doctors say it is only a matter of time now. Julian's parents are in Paris handling some critical international matters, and I just needed to be somewhere that felt like him. I want to gather a few of the photos from his desk, the ones from our wedding. I want to place them by his hospital bed before it is too late. I let the sentence hang, acting unable to finish it. Marcus nodded rapidly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Say no more, Ms. Maya. You take all the time you need tonight. Do you need me to escort you up?" "No," I said softly, offering him a weak, grateful smile. "I think I just need a few moments alone in his space, if that is okay." He swiped his master key card against the security scanner and pressed the elevator override button for the executive floor. I stepped into the glass elevator, maintaining my fragile facade, until the doors slid shut and I began my ascent. The moment the lobby disappeared from view, my posture straightened. The grieving widow vanished, replaced by a woman preparing to burn an empire to the ground. The elevator chimed softly as I arrived on the top floor. The executive suite was dark, save for the emergency exit lights casting long, eerie shadows across the plush carpets. The silence up here was absolute. To my left was Julian's massive corner office, the place I told Marcus I was going. To my right, down a long corridor of frosted glass, was Jamal's domain. Jamal was the chief financial officer. He was the one who managed the books, hid the shadow ledgers, and funneled the stolen company money to the underground syndicate. He was also a deeply paranoid man. He trusted no one, not even his own parents, and certainly not the building's maintenance staff. I walked swiftly down the corridor, making no sound. When I reached Jamal's office door, I tested the handle. Locked just as I expected. He had installed an independent biometric scanner and a heavy deadbolt on his office door 2 years ago, claiming he needed extra security for sensitive corporate acquisitions. Calvin and Beatrice had praised his diligence. Julian had thought it was overkill. I knew it was because he was hiding millions in embezzled funds. I did not bother trying to hack the biometric scanner. I am an architect, not a magician, but I did not need to break through the front door because I was the one who drew the blueprints for the entire floor. I moved past his office and entered the adjacent corporate boardroom. The room was massive, dominated by a long oak table and surrounded by custom-built floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that I had personally commissioned. The bookshelves backed directly onto the shared wall of Jamal's office. During the construction phase, the city zoning inspector had mandated a secondary emergency access point for the air conditioning system, regulating the server racks in Jamal's suite. To avoid ruining the aesthetic of the boardroom, I designed a hidden access panel disguised as a solid oak shelving unit. Only the construction crew, Julian, and I knew it was there. Jamal, who never bothered to read architectural schematics, had absolutely no idea. I counted the shelves from the left, stopping at the fourth column. I reached my fingers under the bottom lip of the thick wood paneling and found the concealed metallic latch. I pressed upward. A soft click echoed in the empty room. Putting my weight against the heavy wood, I pushed. The entire shelving unit swung smoothly inward on concealed industrial hinges, revealing a dark, narrow crawl space that housed the humming ventilation ducts. I slipped inside, pulling the heavy shelf closed behind me. The space was tight and smelled of filtered air and dust. I turned on my small flashlight and shone the beam onto the drywall separating me from Jamal's office. Right at waist height was a secondary maintenance hatch. I undid the simple latch and pushed it open. I crawled through the opening, dropping silently onto the plush carpet of Jamal's private office. The room smelled distinctly of his expensive cologne and stale coffee. I moved quickly to his massive desk, careful not to disturb the piles of paperwork scattered across the surface. I sat in his leather chair and woke up his computer monitors. A password prompt flashed on the screen. Jamal was paranoid, but he was also deeply arrogant. He thought he was the smartest person in any room. Julian had told me once, laughing over a glass of wine, that Jamal used the same variation of his college fraternity initiation date for every single password he owned. I typed the date into the prompt, added a capital letter and a special character, and held my breath. The screen unlocked immediately. I shook my head in absolute disgust. These were the brilliant masterminds who thought they could get away with murdering my husband. I pulled the encrypted cloning drive from my tote bag and plugged it into the back of his computer tower. I navigated past the dummy folders and the fake corporate accounts, digging deep into the secure server partitions. It did not take long to find what I was looking for. A folder heavily encrypted and hidden beneath layers of system files labeled simply with a string of numbers. I initiated the bypass protocol Julian had loaded onto the drive. A progress bar popped up on the screen, crawling agonizingly slowly. 5%, 10%. While the drive worked, I opened the readable files. The sheer magnitude of their theft made my blood run cold. Millions of dollars siphoned from legitimate commercial development projects and funneled into offshore shell companies managed by Chloe. Escrow accounts drained to pay for Beatrice's luxury vehicles and Calvin's private gambling debts. And then I found the syndicate files, the private loan contracts from the ruthless Chicago creditors. The interest rates were astronomical, predatory, designed to trap the borrower forever. But the most horrifying part was the collateral documentation. Jamal had forged Julian's signature, pledging our home, Julian's personal stock portfolio, and the seed money for my architectural firm to guarantee the illegal loans. They had literally signed our lives away. When Julian found out and threatened to expose them, they realized the only way out was the $30 million corporate life insurance policy, a policy that only paid out if Julian was dead. 45%, 50%. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I kept glancing at the locked office door, terrified that a night janitor might suddenly decide to vacuum the hallway. I willed the progress bar to move faster. I needed every single file, every forged signature, every shadow ledger. I needed the undeniable proof that my in-laws were not grieving parents but desperate, bloodthirsty criminals. 70%, 80%. The silence of the office was suddenly broken by a faint, muffled sound from the main corridor. I froze my hand, hovering over the computer mouse. It sounded like the heavy metallic jingle of keys, Marcus the security guard making his scheduled midnight rounds. I held my breath, listening intently. The footsteps were slow, methodical. They were moving down the hallway, getting closer to the executive suites. I looked back at the screen. 90%, 92%. Come on, I whispered to the machine, pleading with the technology to hurry. The footsteps stopped right outside Jamal's office door. I could see the shadow of a pair of shoes blocking the faint light seeping under the doorframe. My chest tightened painfully. If Marcus tried the handle, it would be locked. But if he decided to do a visual check of the executive suites using his master key, I would be caught sitting at the CFO's desk downloading highly confidential corporate files. All my leverage, all our hope of survival would be destroyed. 1% to 98%. The shadow under the door shifted. I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy metal key sliding into the lock cylinder. 100%. The screen flashed green. Download complete. I yanked the cloning drive from the computer tower and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. I quickly locked the computer screen, returning the monitors to their dark sleeping state. I grabbed my tote bag and scrambled silently toward the open maintenance hatch hidden beneath the desk line. Just as I slid my body back into the dark, dusty crawl space of the shelving unit, the heavy office door handle began to turn. The heavy brass handle of Jamal's office door clicked open. I pressed my back flat against the cold metal of the ventilation duct, burying myself as deeply into the shadows of the crawl space as physically possible. Through the tiny crack between the custom oak shelves, I saw the beam of a heavy-duty flashlight sweep across the room. It was Marcus. His heavy boots stepped onto the plush carpet. He hummed a low, tuneless melody, scanning the space for anything out of place. My lungs burned. I needed to exhale, but even the softest breath would give me away. I gripped the encrypted cloning drive in my coat pocket, the sharp plastic edges digging into my palm. If he noticed the slightly shifted chair or the lingering warmth of the computer monitors, it was all over. Marcus stood in the center of the room for what felt like an eternity. He shone his light directly toward the bookshelf. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then his radio crackled with static and a dispatcher asked for his location. He responded that the executive floor was clear. The flashlight beam swept away. He stepped back into the hallway, pulling the heavy door shut until the deadbolt snapped into place with a loud final click. I let out a ragged, silent breath. I did not waste another second. I crawled backward through the narrow maintenance shaft until I reached the laundry chute Julian had told me about. I swung my legs over the edge and slid down into the dark. The descent was fast and rough, dropping me into a canvas laundry bin in the sub-basement. I scrambled out, brushed the lint from my black trench coat, and slipped through the loading dock doors into the freezing Seattle rain. When I finally reached my car in the parking garage, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely put the key in the ignition. But the drive was secure. I had the shadow ledgers, I had the syndicate contracts. Half the battle was won. The address Dr. Sterling had slipped me led deep into the dense, rain-soaked forests just outside the city limits. It was an old, decommissioned private clinic hidden at the end of a long, unmarked gravel road. The structure looked entirely abandoned from the outside, surrounded by towering pine trees and draped in shadows. I parked my car out of sight behind a crumbling stone wall, pulling my coat tighter around me as I dashed through the downpour to a heavy steel side door. I knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 times exactly as Julian had instructed. The door swung open, revealing Dr. Sterling in faded green scrubs. The exhaustion on his face mirrored my own. He did not say a word, just ushered me inside and locked 3 heavy deadbolts behind me. We walked down a long, dimly lit corridor that smelled of medical-grade antiseptic and damp concrete. This place was completely off the grid, a relic of some private medical practice that had shuttered years ago, now repurposed for desperate situations. Dr. Sterling stopped in front of a small observation room and turned to face me. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a thick manila envelope. I pulled out the crisp white pages inside. My eyes scanned the complex medical terminology, but the conclusion at the bottom was written in plain, terrifying English. "It is official," Dr. Sterling said, his voice a low, grim whisper. "We ran the blood panels 3 times using independent mass spectrometry. The compound in Julian's system is a highly synthesized, slow-acting neurotoxin. It is incredibly rare, extremely expensive, and utterly untraceable by standard hospital toxicology screens. It was specifically engineered to mimic the exact physiological markers of a massive fatal myocardial infarction." I stared at the laboratory seal on the paper. The undeniable proof of attempted murder was right there in black and white. They had not just tried to kill him. They had purchased a boutique military-grade poison to ensure nobody would ever question the cause of death. Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, Chloe. They had sat around that mahogany dining table, smiling at my husband, watching him swallow a chemical cocktail designed to suffocate his heart without leaving a single fingerprint behind. "I have the financial records," I told Dr. Sterling, tapping the pocket where the cloned drive rested safely. "They owe a Chicago syndicate millions upon millions. They leveraged everything we owned to get it. They needed Julian dead for a $30 million corporate life insurance payout. This toxicology report is the final nail in their coffin." Dr. Sterling nodded, but his expression remained painfully grim. He looked through the reinforced glass window of the observation room. "Maya, we have a massive problem." I followed his gaze through the glass and my heart shattered completely. Julian was lying on a narrow clinical bed, thrashing weakly against the sheets. He was soaked in sweat, his skin a terrifying shade of gray. The heart monitor beside him beeped with a frantic, disorganized rhythm. I pushed past Dr. Sterling and rushed into the room. Julian's eyes were rolled back, his jaw locked tight. I grabbed his hand. It was freezing cold, trembling uncontrollably. "Julian," I cried out, stroking his damp forehead. "Julian, I am here. I have the proof. We have it all." He did not respond. A violent tremor ripped through his body, arching his spine off the mattress. "What is happening to him?" I demanded, looking back at Dr. Sterling, who was already pushing a syringe of clear liquid into Julian's IV line. "You said you flushed his system. You said the counteragent was working." "It was working," Dr. Sterling said, his hands moving with frantic precision. "But the neurotoxin was designed to bind directly to the cardiac tissue. The residual poison is flaring up. His nervous system is under massive attack. The counteragent only paused the deterioration. It did not eradicate the chemical completely. He is going into acute neurogenic shock." The monitor blared a solid, continuous tone. Julian's chest stopped moving. "No!" I screamed, my voice tearing through my throat. "Julian, no, do not leave me. You cannot leave me now." Dr. Sterling grabbed a defibrillator, charging the paddles with a sharp whine. "Clear!" he shouted, pressing them firmly to Julian's chest. His body jerked violently from the electrical current. The monitor remained a flat, terrifying line. "Charge again," Dr. Sterling ordered himself, his face dripping with sweat. "Clear." Another jolt, another violent spasm. I fell to my knees beside the bed, burying my face in my hands, praying to God, praying to the universe, praying to whatever force would listen. They could not win. Beatrice and Calvin could not murder their own son and walk away rich and free. A single stuttering beep broke the silence, then another. The monitor slowly picked up a fragile, uneven rhythm. Julian took a ragged, gasping breath, his chest shuddering as air finally filled his lungs again. I collapsed against the side of the bed, sobbing into the sheets. Dr. Sterling leaned heavily against the medical cart, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "He stabilized," Dr. Sterling breathed heavily. "But Maya, I cannot keep doing this. I do not have the proper equipment in this safe house to perform a full cellular dialysis. If we do not get him to a top-tier, heavily equipped medical facility within the next 48 hours, his heart will give out permanently. The poison will win." 48 hours. The clock was ticking so incredibly fast. I looked down at my husband, the man who had loved me, protected me, and built a life with me. He was fighting a war inside his own veins because of the people who shared his blood. I had the shadow ledgers. I had the syndicate contracts. I had the toxicology report. I had all the ammunition I needed to completely destroy them. But I could not just hand it over to the police. If I did, the investigation would take months. Julian would be stuck in a hospital under his legal name, making him a sitting duck for my in-laws or the syndicate to finish the job. No, I had to execute this perfectly. I had to force Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, and Chloe to return to Seattle. I had to lure them right into the jaws of a trap they could never escape. And I had to strip them of every single asset they possessed, so the syndicate would turn all their wrath onto them instead of us. "I need to go back to the house," I said, my voice hardening into steel. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face. "I need to maintain the illusion that I am the helpless, grieving widow. If they suspect I know anything, they will disappear in Europe forever." Dr. Sterling nodded grimly. "I will keep him alive, Maya. You have my word. Just finish this." I kissed Julian's forehead one last time. It was burning hot with fever. "Hold on for me," I whispered. "Just hold on." I walked out of the clinic and back into the freezing rain. The drive back to our neighbor was an exercise in pure mental compartmentalization. I locked away my terror. I locked away my grief. I let the cold, calculating fury of an architect take over my mind. I started drafting the blueprint for their downfall. I would contact the federal authorities, I would prepare the evidence packages, I would send the message that would pull them back across the Atlantic. The storm was finally breaking as I turned onto our quiet, upscale suburban street. The early morning light was just beginning to turn the sky a pale, bruised purple. I mentally rehearsed exactly what I was going to tell Beatrice when she inevitably called to check on my compliance with their legal documents. I would sound broken, I would sound defeated. But as I turned the corner and my house came into view, my foot slammed instinctively onto the brake pedal. My breath caught in my throat. The meticulously manicured driveway of our home was not empty. Parked directly in front of my closed garage doors were two massive, unmarked black cars. Their engines were idling, thick plumes of white exhaust billowing into the chilly morning air. The windows were tinted completely black, obscuring anyone sitting inside. These were not police vehicles. They were not hospital administrators. They were not neighbors coming to offer their condolences. The syndicate had found us. The rain pounded against the windshield as I kept my foot firmly pressed on the brake pedal. Two massive, unmarked black cars were idling directly in front of my closed garage doors, their thick exhaust plumes curling into the damp Seattle air. I did not need to guess who these men were. Julian had warned me. The shadow ledgers I had just cloned from Jamal's hidden server confirmed it. The Chicago syndicate had arrived to collect their $30 million debt, and they were parked right on my driveway. My heart hammered a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. But the cold, analytical part of my brain immediately seized control. I am an architect. I solve complex, high-stakes structural problems under immense pressure every single day. I mapped out the structural integrity of this confrontation before I even shifted the car into park. I had the financial records proving Jamal's massive embezzlement. I had the toxicology report from Dr. Sterling proving my in-laws had poisoned my husband. What I lacked was the direct, undeniable audio link connecting the illegal underground loan to the people currently vacationing in Paris. I needed a recorded confession, and the men sitting in those idling cars were going to hand it to me. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the voice memo application and set the screen lock to remain active. I slipped the phone deep into the right pocket of my black trench coat, positioning the microphone perfectly to capture outside audio. Then I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I needed to be the exact woman these men expected to find a shattered, clueless wife completely broken by her husband's sudden tragic medical event. I rubbed my eyes hard until they were red and bloodshot. I let my shoulders slump deliberately, shedding the fierce, capable posture I normally carried. I took a deep, shuddering breath, opened my car door, and stepped out into the freezing rain. The moment my boots hit the wet pavement, the doors of the black vehicles opened simultaneously. Two men stepped out. They did not look like street thugs. They wore impeccably tailored charcoal suits and expensive leather overcoats that repelled the rain. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized precision, completely ignoring the downpour as they walked down my driveway to intercept me. The taller man had a sharp, angular face and eyes as cold as dead stone. The second man was built like a cinder block, his hands resting casually near the lapels of his coat. They looked entirely out of place in our quiet, manicured suburban neighborhood, and that was exactly the point they wanted to be seen as a deadly threat. "Excuse me," I said, letting my voice waver perfectly. My hands trembled as I clutched my tote bag to my chest. "You are blocking my garage. I really need to get inside. I have been at the hospital all night and I am just so tired." The taller man stopped 3 feet away from me. He did not offer a polite smile or apologize for the inconvenience. He just stared at me, evaluating my obvious distress with absolute indifference. "Are you Maya?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly, and carrying a distinct Midwestern cadence. "Julian's wife." "Yes," I whispered, stepping back slightly, allowing fear to widen my eyes. "Who are you? Are you from the hospital? Did something happen to his heart monitor? The nurses said they would call me if there was a change." "We are not from the hospital, Maya," the man said, stepping closer. "We are business associates of your husband and your brother-in-law. We need to speak with Jamal immediately. We went by the corporate headquarters, but security said the executive floor was locked down. So we came here. Call him. Tell him we are waiting." I let out a ragged, pathetic sob, burying my face in my free hand. The tears came easily, fueled by the sheer exhaustion of the past 3 days and the very real terror of standing in front of syndicate enforcers. "Jamal is not here," I cried, my voice cracking perfectly. "None of them are here. I am completely alone." The cinder block of a man shifted his weight, exchanging a dark look with his partner. "What do you mean none of them are here? The debt matures this week. Jamal knows exactly what happens if he misses this deadline. Where is he?" I shook my head, taking another step back toward my car as if I wanted to flee. The heavy rain soaked through my coat, but I ignored the chill. My finger found the record button on the phone, hidden deep inside my pocket. I pressed it firmly, feeling the slight vibration confirming the audio was capturing. "I do not know anything about a debt," I sobbed, wiping my wet cheeks. "Julian had a massive heart attack on Sunday. His organs are failing. He is on life support right now, and the doctors say he is not going to wake up." The taller man's eyes narrowed. He stepped directly into my personal space, his height casting a dark shadow over me. "Do not play stupid with us, lady. We do not care about your husband's health problems. We care about the $30 million Jamal borrowed from our employers in Chicago." $30 million! I gasped, letting genuine shock lace my voice. What are you talking about? We run a commercial real estate development firm. We use traditional corporate financing. Julian would never borrow money from private lenders. You have the wrong family. I do not have the wrong family. The man snarled, his patience completely evaporating. He reached into his overcoat and pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper, shoving it into my face. Jamal took $30 million from us 4 months ago. He said the firm's commercial portfolio was temporarily tied up in bad acquisitions. Do you want to know what he used to guarantee that cash? He forged your husband's signature. He put up this very house, Julian's private stock accounts, and the architectural firm registered in your name as collateral. So you can drop the Grieving Widow Act right now. If Jamal does not hand over our money by Friday, we are taking everything you own, and then we are taking you. I let out a sharp, terrified shriek, clapping both hands over my mouth. I backed away until my spine hit the wet metal of my car door. I needed to keep them talking. I needed the recording to be absolutely flawless for the federal agents. I swear to you, I know nothing about this. I wept, sliding down slightly against the car door to look as pathetic and helpless as possible. Julian is dying. Beatrice and Calvin took Jamal and his wife to Paris. They left me here yesterday. They told me to pull the plug on Julian while they were gone. They are staying at the Four Seasons in Paris right now. Please, you have to believe me. The two men froze. The taller one lowered the paper, his jaw clenching with sudden violent realization. Paris, the second man growled, stepping forward. They got on a plane to Paris. Yes, I cried, nodding frantically. They booked first-class tickets. Chloe sent me a text from the runway. They abandoned us. But listen to me, please. If Julian dies, there is a $30 million Keyman life insurance policy owned by the company. The death benefit would flow into the corporate accounts controlled by Beatrice, Calvin, and Jamal. If you are looking for your money, they are planning to have it the moment my husband's death is officially recorded. Please just leave me alone. The taller man stared at me, his cold eyes calculating the information I had just handed him on a silver platter. He was doing the math: a $30 million illegal debt, a Comatose CEO, a $30 million insurance payout that could erase the entire syndicate obligation, and a family of cowards who had just fled to Europe. He tucked the forged collateral document back into his coat pocket. He looked at his partner and gave a sharp, definitive nod. They realized I was utterly useless to them. I was just collateral damage, a naive wife left holding the bag while the real target sipped champagne across the ocean. You listen to me, Maya, the tall man said, leaning in so close I could smell the stale coffee and peppermint on his breath. When you talk to Jamal, you tell him a plane ticket to Paris is not going to save him. Our reach goes way beyond the city limits of Seattle. You tell him that if we do not have our $30 million by Friday, there is not a hole deep enough on this earth for him to hide in. Do you understand me? I nodded rapidly, squeezing my eyes shut and letting out another pathetic sob. I understand. I will tell them. Just please go. The men did not say another word. They turned their backs on me, marching through the freezing rain back to their idling black vehicles. The heavy doors slammed shut in unison. The tires spun briefly on the wet pavement as the two cars reversed out of my driveway and sped off down the street, disappearing into the gray morning mist. I stayed slumped against my car for a full minute, continuing to cry just in case they were watching from down the block. Only when the street was completely empty and the only sound was the heavy rain hitting the concrete did my tears instantly stop. My posture straightened. The trembling in my hands vanished completely. I stood up, smoothing down the front of my wet trench coat. I reached into my deep right pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was still glowing, the timer on the voice memo application reading 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I hit the red square to stop the recording and saved the audio file to my encrypted cloud drive. I walked up the porch steps, unlocked my front door, and stepped into the quiet, empty hallway of my home. I dropped my heavy tote bag onto the console table. Inside that bag was the cloned hard drive with the shadow ledgers. Tucked in my coat pocket was the laboratory toxicology report proving the neurotoxin. And now, safely backed up on my secure servers, was crystal clear high-definition audio of syndicate enforcers explicitly stating Jamal's name, the exact $30 million debt amount, and the forged collateral documents. The trap was fully armed. I had every single piece of the puzzle required to bring the federal government, the insurance fraud division, and the criminal justice system crashing down on my in-laws' heads. I had the hard proof to lock Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, and Chloe in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their natural lives. But I could not execute the final phase of this demolition while they were sitting safely in a luxury hotel suite in Paris. Extradition took time. Bureaucracy took time. If I handed this evidence to the authorities right now, my in-laws would be notified. They would hire expensive international defense attorneys. They would hide the remaining company money in offshore accounts and drag the legal proceedings out for years. Julian and I would have to spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the syndicate to finish what my family started. No, that was not an option. I needed them here. I needed to look them in the eye when the steel jaws of the trap slammed shut. I had to force my murderous in-laws back to American soil, and I knew exactly what kind of bait would bring them running. I walked straight through the entryway and into my home office, ignoring the freezing rainwater dripping from my trench coat onto the hardwood floor. I did not have time to change. I did not have time to rest. I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and plugged in the encrypted cloning drive I had smuggled out of Jamal's executive suite. I needed multiple backups immediately. I uploaded the shadow ledgers, the predatory syndicate contracts, the toxicology report, and the audio recording to 3 separate heavily encrypted cloud servers. I then printed physical copies of everything, organizing the documents into 3 pristine, meticulously labeled binders. As an architect, presentation is everything. In this manner, you make the data impossible to deny. I was about to present a structural flaw in human morality to the federal government, and the foundation of my case was absolutely flawless. You do not call the local police precinct to report a $30 million underground syndicate loan and a $30 million corporate life insurance fraud scheme. You go straight to the top of the food chain. I found the contact information for the insurance conglomerate underwriting Julian's keyman policy. I bypassed the automated phone tree using a calm, commanding tone to reach the senior investigator of their corporate fraud division, a man named Agent Miller. At first, he used that soft, placating tone people reserve for grieving, hysterical widows. I shut that down within 10 seconds. I read off the exact policy numbers, the routing sequences for Jamal's offshore accounts, and the specific chemical compound of the rare neurotoxin currently ravaging my husband's heart. Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, Chloe, I am so sorry to interrupt your healing trip. I just finished meeting with the neurology team at the hospital. They ran the final scans this morning. There is no brain activity left. The machines are the only thing keeping his heart beating. The doctors told me it is time. I am signing the paperwork to disconnect Julian's life support this Friday at 3:00 p.m. I cannot do this alone, but I understand if you cannot make it back in time. I will handle the arrangements. I read the message twice. It was pathetic. It was desperate. It was exactly what they wanted to hear. I pressed send. The message bubbled up on the screen delivered. I set the phone face up on the wooden table and waited. I pictured them sitting in a Michelin-starred restaurant along the Seine, their phones buzzing in unison. I pictured Beatrice dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin, smiling at Calvin because their gruesome problem was finally solving itself. They were coming back for the insurance money. They were coming back to steal the company. I did not have to wait long. Within seconds, the typing bubble appeared next to Chloe's name. My phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the table. Chloe's reply lit up the screen. "We'll be there. I'll bring the legal transfer papers for the firm. Let's make this quick." The next 24 hours leading up to Friday afternoon moved with an agonizing, heavy crawl. Every tick of the clock on my living room wall felt like a hammer striking an anvil. Julian remained hidden inside the restricted critical care unit at Seattle General. His heart still struggling against the remnants of the rare neurotoxin his own mother had served him. The federal agents and insurance fraud investigators remained invisible, but ever present, tracking the international flight logs, waiting patiently for the targets to touch down on American soil. I spent Thursday mentally preparing myself for the hardest acting job of my entire life. I had to look into the eyes of the people who attempted to murder my husband and pretend that they had won. I arrived at Seattle General Hospital at 1:00 on Friday afternoon to prepare for the 3:00 deadline. I wore a simple, unadorned black dress. My hair was pulled back tightly, and I kept my face completely devoid of makeup to highlight the dark, exhausted circles under my eyes. I sat alone in the main lobby, surrounded by the towering glass windows and steel support beams I had personally helped design. The weather outside was cold and gray, perfectly fitting the devastating mood I was required to project. Word of the impending decision to disconnect life support had spread rapidly through the extended family. Several aunts, uncles, and distant cousins from Julian's side of the family had gathered in the lobby to offer their support. They brought bouquets of white lilies, containers of hot food, and genuine heartbreaking tears. They hugged me, holding me tight, whispering how sorry they were that Julian had been taken so young. They had absolutely no idea they were about to be used as props in a horrific, calculated theatrical production. At exactly 2:00, a pair of sleek black luxury town cars pulled up to the circular hospital entrance. The hired drivers stepped out and opened the rear doors simultaneously. I stood up from the lobby, waiting chairs, my pulse quickening, my jaw clenching tight. They had arrived. Calvin stepped out of the first car, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored black suit that looked fresh from a Parisian boutique. He reached back and offered his hand to Beatrice. My mother-in-law emerged wearing a sprawling custom black wool coat, a dramatic wide-brimmed hat, and a sheer black veil that partially obscured her face. It was the kind of extravagant morning attire you see in vintage cinema, completely over the top, hideously expensive, and painstakingly calculated. Jamal and Chloe followed from the second vehicle. Jamal wore a dark, slim-fit suit with a solid black tie, looking solemnly at the wet pavement. Chloe stepped out wearing a fitted black designer dress that cost more than my first car, clutching a black leather handbag tight against her chest. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly to look slightly disheveled, giving the impression of a woman who had been running her hands through it in distress. They did not look like a family rushing back from across the world to say goodbye to a dying son and brother. They looked like a victorious board of directors arriving for a highly anticipated hostile takeover. The moment Beatrice stepped through the sliding glass doors of the hospital lobby, the performance officially began. Her posture, usually rigid and commanding, suddenly wilted like a dying flower. She let out a loud, shuddering gasp that echoed across the marble floor. She collapsed slightly against Calvin, burying her face in his shoulder. Calvin wrapped his thick arm around her, wearing an expression of stoic, masculine grief, his face set in a grim, sorrowful line. "Oh, my boy!" Beatrice cried out, her voice breaking perfectly to capture the attention of everyone in the room. "My beautiful, beautiful boy." The extended family members immediately rushed forward. Aunts and cousins enveloped Beatrice in a swarm of hugs, murmuring words of comfort and support. Chloe immediately began wiping away non-existent tears, embracing Julian's aunts, and nodding bravely as they offered their condolences. Jamal patted his father on the back, looking out the large window as if trying to hold back a massive flood of emotion. It was an absolute masterpiece of emotional manipulation. I watched them from across the lobby, studying their movements, the exact same way I study a structural foundation for weaknesses. I saw the tiny calculated glances Chloe shot toward the elevators to check if the path was clear. I saw the way Jamal subtly checked his expensive watch, impatient to get upstairs and get the corporate paperwork signed. I saw the complete absence of actual tears beneath Beatrice's dramatic black veil. They were playing the crowd perfectly, ensuring that 50 different witnesses could testify to the police and the insurance adjusters about their absolute devastation. I forced my hands to stop shaking. I walked slowly toward the crowd, letting my shoulders drop, making myself look small and entirely defeated. I needed to feed their massive egos. I needed them to believe they had completely broken my spirit. "Beatrice," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The crowd of relatives parted slightly. Beatrice looked up from Calvin's shoulder. She rushed toward me, throwing her arms around my neck. The embrace was incredibly tight, but it felt like being wrapped in a bed of poisoned thorns. She smelled of expensive French perfume and first-class airplane cabin air. "Maya, darling," Beatrice sobbed loudly, ensuring every single family member could hear her. "We came as fast as we possibly could. The flight was absolute agony. Tell me there is still time. Tell me my son is still breathing." "He is," I whispered, letting a single genuine tear of sheer anger fall down my cheek. "But the doctors say 300 is the absolute limit. His organs are failing." Calvin stepped forward, placing a heavy paternal hand on my shoulder. "You have been so strong, Maya, but you do not have to carry this terrible burden alone anymore. The family is here now. We will take over everything." Chloe stepped up beside Jamal, clutching her designer bag. "We should go up to the private waiting room," she suggested, her voice dripping with fake, sugary sympathy. "Maya looks completely exhausted. We need some privacy before we go in to see Julian one last time." The extended family nodded in agreement, stepping back to give us space as we moved toward the VIP elevators. I swiped the access card the hospital had provided, and the 5 of us stepped inside the glass cabin. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sympathetic gaze of the relatives in the lobby. The elevator began its smooth ascent to the 4th floor. The transformation was instantaneous and utterly terrifying. The exact moment the doors locked and the lobby vanished from sight, Beatrice dropped her arms from Calvin. She stepped away from me, smoothing the front of her expensive black coat with brisk, annoyed movements. The theatrical grief vanished from her face, completely replaced by a cold, calculating sharpness. She lifted her sheer veil and checked her reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall, adjusting a stray hair with her manicured fingers. Calvin rolled his broad shoulders, letting out a long, irritated sigh. Jamal pulled out his smartphone and immediately started typing an email while Chloe unclasped her designer handbag to check her lipstick. Not a single one of them asked about Julian's condition. Not one of them asked if he was in pain or if he had woken up. The charade was strictly for public consumption. Now that we were entirely alone, they were purely focused on the business of death. The elevator chimed and the doors opened to the private family waiting area outside the intensive care unit. The room was secluded, furnished with comfortable leather chairs, a small coffee station, and a heavy wooden door that shut behind us, ensuring complete privacy from the hospital staff. "All right, let us handle the logistical matters before we have to deal with the medical staff," Calvin said briskly, taking a seat in one of the armchairs. He looked at me with the same clinical, ruthless detachment he used to fire corporate contractors. "Maya, the doctors need the corporate liability release and the medical proxy transferred immediately, so the firm can legally absorb the hospital debts. We also need to process the life insurance claim the moment the time of death is officially pronounced." Chloe stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from her bag. She placed them on the glass coffee table and handed me a heavy silver pen. "I have tabbed all the signature lines, Maya," Chloe said, her tone brisk and commanding. "It is the same paperwork I sent you while we were in Paris. Delegation of medical authority, surrender of your emergency voting proxy, and permanent transfer of Julian's voting control to Jamal. We need your signature on all 6 pages right now. The insurance adjusters are waiting for our green light." I looked down at the paperwork resting on the glass table. The transfer of Julian's voting shares. They needed that voting control so they could direct the $30 million corporate death benefit into the accounts they controlled, giving them the liquid capital to pay off the Chicago syndicate without interference. Beatrice stepped closer to me, her eyes dropping away from my face and locking onto my left hand. "And there is one other thing, Maya." I looked up at her, meeting her cold, calculating stare. "Julian's wedding band," Beatrice said, holding out her open palm. "It is a family heirloom. It belonged to Calvin's grandfather, long before it belonged to Julian. Since you and Julian did not have any children to pass it down to, the ring needs to return to the family estate immediately. Hand it over before we go into the hospital room. The nurses tend to lose these things during the post-mortem procedures, and I will not have a piece of our legacy misplaced by careless hospital staff." The sheer audacity of the demand sent a shockwave of ice through my veins. They were demanding I strip myself of my husband's ring and sign away our entire corporate livelihood before they even walked into his room to watch him die. They viewed me as nothing more than a minor administrative hurdle standing between them and a $30 million payday. Jamal crossed his arms, leaning against the wall, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "Sign the papers, Maya. The doctors are waiting to pull the ventilator. Let us get this over with so we can all go home." I looked at the silver pen resting on the legal documents. I looked at Chloe's expectant, entitled smirk. I looked at Calvin's impatient glare. I looked at Beatrice's outstretched hand, waiting for the gold band to be stripped from my finger. The architect inside my mind checked the structural load of the moment. The pressure was immense, but my foundation was completely solid. It was time to push back. I reached down and picked up the thick stack of legal documents. I did not pick up the silver pen. Instead, I calmly folded the papers in half, creasing them sharply down the middle. I unzipped my tote bag and slid the documents inside, letting the bag fall closed. Chloe's smirk instantly vanished. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "The lawyers need those faxed back immediately." I zipped my bag shut and looked directly into Beatrice's eyes. I kept my voice incredibly soft, but laced it with absolute steel. "I am not signing these papers," I said, "and I am certainly not taking off my husband's wedding ring. Julian is a man of procedure and respect. He would absolutely never want his life's work and his legacy handled like a cheap transaction in a hospital hallway." The silence in the private waiting room becomes so absolute that I can hear the erratic, shallow breathing of the people surrounding me. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moves. The only sound is the faint mechanical hum of the hospital ventilation system overhead. I have just slid the folded transfer documents into my leather tote bag. I have just refused to hand over my husband's wedding band. Beatrice slowly lowers her empty, outstretched hand. Her perfectly manicured fingers curl inward, digging sharply into her own palm. The polished mask of the grieving, sophisticated matriarch completely shatters, revealing the vicious, desperate woman underneath. Calvin's face turns a dangerous shade of crimson, the veins in his thick neck bulging against the collar of his expensive dress shirt. But Chloe is the first to break the silence. She lunges forward, closing the distance between us until there are mere inches separating our faces. The fake, sugary sympathy she wore like a cheap perfume in the lobby vanishes instantly. Her face twists into an ugly, entitled sneer, her blue eyes narrowing into venomous slits. "Who do you think you are talking to, Maya?" Chloe hisses, her voice vibrating with a sudden, vicious rage. "You do not get to dictate terms to us. You do not get to walk in here and play the righteous widow holding on to a legacy that does not even belong to you." I stand perfectly still, keeping my spine absolutely rigid. I do not take a single step back. I look down at her, maintaining a cold, unbothered expression. "My legacy is my marriage, Chloe," I say evenly, "and my husband is lying in a bed down the hall." "He is basically a corpse," Chloe snaps back, dropping all pretense of basic human decency. "And do not talk to me about your marriage like it was some kind of fairy tale. You know exactly what you are. You were always just a ghetto charity case that Julian took pity on. A working-class nobody from the South Side who manipulated her way into a family of real wealth. Beatrice never wanted you here. Calvin never wanted you here. You are an ugly outsider who got lucky and your luck just ran out." The raw, unfiltered racism and classism hang heavily in the air. For 7 years, Chloe had hidden her resentment behind backhanded compliments and passive-aggressive microaggressions. Now desperate for the $30 million insurance payout to save her own skin from a ruthless underground syndicate, she lets her true colors show. She wants me to react. She wants me to scream, to slap her, to give them a reason to call hospital security and have me legally removed from the premises as a violent, unstable threat. I do not give her the satisfaction. I just stare at her, letting her pathetic, hateful words wash over me without leaving a single mark. "I am an architect, Chloe," I say, my voice steady and resonant. "I build foundations. Your entire life is built on a credit card limit you do not even pay for. Do not ever speak to me about worth." I turn my back on her and take a step toward the heavy wooden door of the waiting room. I am done with this conversation. I need to get out of this room before I lose my carefully maintained composure. I do not take a second step. Jamal steps directly into my path, positioning his large frame between me and the exit. He crosses his arms over his chest, his dark suit straining against his shoulders. The casual, bored demeanor he displayed in the elevator is gone. His face is slick with a thin layer of nervous sweat, his eyes wide and frantic. He looks exactly like a man who owes $30 million to a gang of Chicago criminals and realizes his only lifeline is walking out the door. "You are not going anywhere, Maya," Jamal says, his voice a low, aggressive growl. He steps even closer, using his physical size to intimidate me, looming over me just like the syndicate enforcers had done in my driveway. "You are going to take those papers out of your purse. You are going to sign on the dotted lines, and you are going to hand over the corporate voting rights right now. Move out of my way, Jamal," I command, keeping my chin elevated, refusing to shrink under his shadow. "I said you are not leaving," he repeats, raising his voice and stepping forward until the tips of his expensive leather shoes touch mine. He raises a hand, pressing his palm flat against the wooden door, physically trapping me in the room. "We do not have time for your emotional games. The doctors are waiting for the authorization to pull the ventilator. The insurance adjusters need the corporate transfer finalized before the time of death is called. You are going to sign those papers, or I swear to God, I will make sure you walk out of this hospital with absolutely nothing." I look at the sweat beading on his forehead. I look at the frantic terror dancing in his eyes. He is not mourning a brother. He is mourning his own impending demise. If he does not get my signature, the syndicate will slaughter him. I hold all the power in this room, and he knows it. I look him dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of absolute authority I possess. "You are pressing on a load-bearing wall, Jamal," I say, my tone dropping to a deadly quiet frequency. "And if you do not step aside right now, I am going to let the entire structure collapse directly on top of your head." Jamal flinches, visibly thrown by the sheer iciness of my response. He expects tears. He expects a terrified, submissive woman. He does not know what to do with a woman who looks back at him without a single drop of fear. Calvin finally intervenes. "Jamal, step back." Calvin barks, his deep voice cutting through the tension in the room. Jamal hesitates, his jaw clenching with furious frustration, but he slowly lowers his arm from the door and takes a half step to the side. Calvin walks over, smoothing the front of his suit jacket, reclaiming his role as the commanding patriarch. He looks at me, his eyes sharp and calculating. He is evaluating the legal risks of a physical altercation in a hospital waiting room. He knows that if this gets messy, it threatens the insurance payout. "Maya, be reasonable," Calvin says, attempting to force his tone into a shape of professional diplomacy. "We are all operating under immense emotional distress. Chloe misspoke, and Jamal is simply anxious to ensure Julian's corporate affairs are settled properly. But the fact remains the business cannot be tied up in probate court. The firm requires immediate transfer of authority. We need your signature today. I look at Calvin, recognizing the exact pivot in his strategy. He realizes intimidation will not work, so he is shifting to corporate logic. It is the perfect opening for the trap I have spent the last 48 hours building. I am perfectly reasonable, Calvin, I reply, straightening my posture and meeting his gaze with absolute clarity. But I am also Julian's wife, and while he remains medically incapacitated, I hold his emergency voting proxy. You want a seamless transition of power. You want the life insurance adjusters to process a clean, uncontested claim the moment Julian's heart stops. Am I correct? Calvin nods slowly, his eyes narrowing as he tries to anticipate my angle. Yes, a clean transition is essential. Then you know exactly how the insurance investigators operate. I continue speaking the language of corporate liability. If I sign a complete surrender of my husband's multi-million-dollar voting shares under extreme duress in a hospital waiting room surrounded by hostile family members minutes before a ventilator is pulled, it will trigger an immediate massive federal audit. The color drains slightly from Calvin's face. The word audit hits him like a physical blow. He knows about the shadow ledgers. He knows about the $30 million syndicate debt. An insurance audit would tear through their finances and expose the embezzlement in a matter of days. The insurance company will freeze the payout, I say, pressing my advantage, watching the panic reignite in Jamal's eyes. They will drag us into litigation for months investigating coercion. You will not see a single dime of that $30 million policy until the courts clear the transaction. Is that what you want, a frozen asset while the company bleeds? Beatrice steps forward, her face tight with sudden apprehension. What are you suggesting, Maya? I am suggesting that if you want the rights to the company, we do this legally by the book and on the record. I declare, my voice echoing with finality in the small room. We do not do this in a hospital hallway like common thieves. You want my proxy authority. You want control of Julian's voting rights. Call an official emergency board meeting for Monday morning at the firm's headquarters. Send the formal agenda through the company lawyers. I will sit at the mahogany table, we will record the minutes, and I will sign the transfer documents under the purview of corporate law. It will be ironclad, legally binding, and completely immune to an insurance audit. Calvin stares at me, his mind racing through the variables. He is weighing the delay against the risk. He needs the money to pay the Chicago syndicate, but he also knows that a frozen insurance payout due to a contested signature would guarantee their execution. He believes I am just a grieving widow trying to buy one last weekend of emotional control. He believes I want the dignity of a formal boardroom surrender rather than a hospital hallway mugging. He has absolutely no idea that the federal government, the FBI White-Collar Crime Division, and the life insurance fraud investigators are already waiting for that exact meeting to take place. Monday morning, Calvin says slowly, his voice heavy with calculation. 9:00 sharp in the main boardroom. 9:00, I agree, offering a single definitive nod. And until then, Julian stays on the ventilator. Nobody touches his life support until the ink is dry on those transfer documents. Calvin looks at Beatrice, then at Jamal. They exchange silent, greedy glances. They think they have outsmarted me. They think they have successfully negotiated a clean legal acquisition of their son's entire fortune. Agreed, Calvin says, stepping back and gesturing toward the door. We will see you on Monday, Maya. I turn around, grip the heavy brass handle, and pull the door open. I walk out into the sterile hospital corridor without looking back. They watch me leave, congratulating themselves on their victory, completely unaware that they have just eagerly agreed to step directly onto the gallows. Monday morning arrived with a sharp, blinding clarity. I walked into the corporate headquarters of the family real estate firm at exactly 8:00 in the morning, a full hour before the emergency board meeting was scheduled to begin. The building was quiet, the early morning sunlight slicing through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows I had personally designed. I took the private executive elevator up to the top floor, my footsteps making no sound against the thick carpeting as I walked past Jamal's locked office and straight into the main boardroom. The room was vast and imposing. At its center sat a massive custom-built mahogany table surrounded by 12 high-backed leather chairs. I chose a seat near the middle of the table, perfectly positioning myself, so I had a clear, unobstructed view of the heavy oak double doors. I placed my leather tote bag on the polished wood in front of me, folded my hands, and waited. I did not feel fear. I did not feel the crushing, suffocating grief that had weighed me down in the hospital waiting room just 3 days prior. As an architect, I know that before you can construct something new and beautiful, you often have to demolish the rotten, decaying structure that stands in its place. Sitting in the silent boardroom, I was no longer a grieving widow. I was the demolition crew, and my finger was hovering directly over the detonator. At exactly 8:55, the heavy oak doors opened. Calvin walked in first, radiating an aggressive, manufactured authority. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore a dark, imposing suit. Beatrice flanked him, her dramatic morning couture replaced by a sharp, tailored business dress that screamed of generational wealth and untouchable privilege. Jamal and Chloe followed close behind them. Jamal looked significantly better than he had in the hospital hallway. The frantic, sweaty desperation had vanished, replaced by a greedy, arrogant swagger. He believed he was 90 seconds away from securing the $30 million insurance payout that would save his life from the Chicago syndicate. Chloe walked beside him with a triumphant, entitled smirk plastered across her face, carrying a stack of pristine legal folders. None of them expected to see me already sitting there. They paused for a fraction of a second, surprised by my early arrival and my calm, upright posture. But their sheer arrogance quickly paved over their hesitation. They assumed I was simply eager to get the painful paperwork over with so I could return to my dying husband's bedside. "Good morning, Maya," Calvin said briskly, walking to the head of the mahogany table and taking the chairman's seat. He did not offer any false pleasantries or fake sympathy. We were behind closed doors now, and the theatrical performance they put on for the extended family was no longer required. Beatrice took the seat directly to Calvin's right. Jamal and Chloe sat across from me. Chloe tossed the thick stack of legal documents onto the center of the table with a loud, dismissive thud. "Let us make this incredibly brief," Calvin announced, opening his briefcase and pulling out a gold fountain pen. "We have a corporate crisis to manage, and the hospital administration has informed me that Julian's attending physician is standing by for your final authorization to disconnect the ventilator. We need these transition documents executed and filed with the state registry before noon." I looked at the documents resting on the polished wood. The transfer of voting rights, the complete surrender of Julian's personal assets, the medical proxy. They were literally trying to strip the gold from our teeth while looking me dead in the eye. "I understand you are in a rush, Calvin," I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly level. "But as I stated on Friday, I am not signing away my husband's life's work without a clear understanding of the corporate transition plan. Julian built the commercial division of this firm from the ground up. I want to know exactly how his legacy is going to be handled." Jamal let out a loud, harsh bark of laughter. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Julian's legacy," Jamal mocked, shaking his head. "Julian's legacy is currently hooked up to a breathing machine, Maya. The commercial division has been bleeding money for months. The only thing we are transitioning is liability. You should be thanking us for taking this massive financial burden off your hands." Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Her blue eyes locked onto mine, burning with that specific brand of toxic, entitled resentment she had harbored against me since the day we met. "Let us cut the absolute nonsense, Maya," Chloe sneered, dropping her voice into a harsh, condescending register. "You do not care about corporate transition plans. You do not even understand what a corporate transition plan is. You draw blueprints for a living. You are stalling because you think holding out will get you a bigger piece of the pie." She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a separate single sheet of paper, and slid it across the mahogany table toward me. "We anticipated you might try to play hardball." Chloe continued, a vicious smile twisting her lips. "So Jamal and Calvin authorized a severance package for you. We are willing to offer you a one-time payout of $2 million from the firm's discretionary fund. You sign the transfer papers, you take the $2 million, and you walk away completely clean. You can take your little architectural firm, move back to whatever South Side neighborhood you crawled out of, and never contact this family again." I looked down at the single sheet of paper. $2 million. They were offering me $2 million to walk away completely unaware that I had downloaded their shadow ledgers. I knew for an absolute fact that the firm's discretionary fund held exactly $0. They had drained every single corporate account to feed their lavish lifestyles before taking on the $30 million syndicate debt. This severance offer was completely worthless. It was a fake, empty promise designed to trick me into handing over the keys to the insurance policy. If I signed these papers, I would never see a single dime, and Julian would be murdered the moment the ink dried. I looked up from the fake contract, meeting Chloe's hateful stare. $2 million, I repeated softly, letting a trace of amusement color my words. "You think my husband's life is worth a fake check you cannot even cash, Chloe?" Jamal slammed his hand flat against the table, the sudden violent noise echoing sharply in the large room. Do not push your luck, Maya, Jamal snarled, leaning aggressively over the wood. You are sitting at a table with real players now. You take the money, or we tie your architectural firm up in so much corporate litigation, you will be designing public restrooms for the rest of your miserable life. We hold all the cards here. You are completely out of your depth. Calvin held up a hand, silencing his son. He looked at me with cold reptilian calculation. Maya, Calvin said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening octave. We are trying to be generous here, honoring the fact that Julian cared for you. But do not mistake our generosity for weakness. We have a team of corporate lawyers waiting in the lobby. If you refuse to sign these documents voluntarily, we will have you declared legally incompetent due to emotional distress. We will tie your assets up in probate court, and we will watch you go entirely bankrupt fighting us. Sign the papers now. The hostility in the room was suffocating. They had surrounded me, cornered me in the very room I had built for them, bringing the full, crushing weight of their privilege and their ruthlessness down on my shoulders. They expected me to break. They expected me to cry, to reach for the gold pen and surrender everything I loved just to escape their wrath. Instead, I sat back in my chair. I did not reach for the pen. I did not look at the documents. I turned my attention slowly, deliberately to Beatrice. My mother-in-law had been sitting silently beside Calvin this entire time, watching the intimidation tactics play out with an expression of supreme regal satisfaction. She believed she had finally won. She believed she had successfully eradicated the black working-class stain from her perfect, wealthy family portrait. Beatrice, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the heavy tension in the room. You have been very quiet this morning. Do you have anything to add to this generous offer? Beatrice slowly uncrossed her legs. She smoothed the skirt of her pristine business dress and looked at me as if I were a piece of garbage she had just discovered stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoe. I think Calvin and Chloe have made the reality of your situation perfectly clear, Beatrice stated, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. You never belonged here, Maya. Not in this firm, not in this building, and certainly not in this family. You were an ugly, temporary mistake that Julian made to rebel against his upbringing. You tricked him into believing you were his equal, but you were always just an outsider. You have no class, you have no legacy, and you have absolutely no right to sit at this table. Take the money, sign the papers, and get out of my sight. I absorbed her words, feeling the sheer hateful weight of them. For 7 years, I had bitten my tongue. For 7 years, I had smiled through the insults, the racism, the exclusion because I loved her son. I had tried so incredibly hard to build a bridge between my world and theirs. But looking at her now, looking at the murderers who sat so comfortably in their custom leather chairs, I realized I did not want a bridge. I wanted a match. I let a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. I reached out and gently pushed the stack of transfer documents back toward the center of the table. I lifted my left wrist and deliberately checked the time on my watch. It was exactly 9:00. You are absolutely right, Beatrice, I said, my voice ringing with a sudden, absolute authority that made Calvin flinch. I never belonged at this table. I build things with integrity. I do not poison them from the inside out. Chloe let out a sharp, confused breath. What did you just say? I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked dead onto my mother-in-law. I never belonged at this table, I repeated softly, but the actual CEO does. Before Beatrice could even process the words, before Jamal could formulate a response, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom suddenly swung open. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom do not just swing open. They are thrown apart with a violent concussive force that sends a shockwave through the entire executive floor. The heavy brass handles strike the drywall with a thunderous crack that makes every single person at the mahogany table jump in their seats. I do not flinch. I just sit back in my leather chair, interlock my fingers, and watch my architectural masterpiece perform exactly as designed. Standing in the doorway is a man who is supposed to be taking his final labored breaths on a hospital ventilator. Julian is not wearing a blood-stained hospital gown. He is not hooked up to a tangle of plastic tubes, and he is certainly not fighting a rare neurotoxin. He is wearing a sharp, dark blue tailored suit that fits his broad shoulders perfectly. His posture is steady, but the ordeal has clearly left its mark. His skin is still slightly pale from the intensive treatments, and there are faint shadows beneath his eyes. Dr. Sterling warned him that he is nowhere near fully recovered, but he is upright, alert, and carrying himself with the quiet authority of the CEO they believed they had murdered. The man I love has returned from the dead, and he has brought the full weight of the federal government with him. Flanking my husband are 4 individuals who look completely out of place in a corporate real estate office. Agent Davis, the lead FBI investigator from the White Collar Crime Division, steps into the room. Her face is a mask of pure professional stone, her eyes immediately scanning the room to assess the threat level of the occupants. Behind her are two large, heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical gear over their business attire. Bringing up the rear is Agent Miller from the Life Insurance Fraud Division, holding a thick briefcase filled with the evidence I provided. He quietly reaches back and pushes the heavy oak doors shut. The heavy click of the deadbolt locking us all inside echoes loudly in the vast space. The room is instantly sealed. There is no way out. The air conditioning hums quietly above us, but the oxygen in the boardroom seems to evaporate entirely. I turn my attention to the people sitting across from me, absorbing their reactions like a spectator at an incredible theatrical performance. As an architect, I am trained to study structural failure. I know exactly what it looks like when a load-bearing pillar buckles under too much weight. Today, I get to watch human beings buckle the exact same way. Chloe is the first to break. She had been taking a sip from her porcelain coffee mug, her face still twisted in that arrogant, entitled smirk she wore while offering me a fake $2 million severance. When she sees Julian standing there, her brain completely short-circuits. The cognitive dissonance of seeing a dead man walking into a corporate boardroom is too much for her fragile, privileged reality to handle. Her fingers go entirely limp. The coffee mug slips from her grasp and hits the polished marble floor. It shatters into 100 jagged pieces. Dark, hot coffee splashes across her expensive designer shoes, staining the immaculate leather. She does not even notice. Her blue eyes are wide with an animalistic terror. Her jaw hangs open, but no sound comes out. She looks like she has just seen a ghost, which from her perspective, she essentially has. Beatrice is next, the sophisticated, untouchable matriarch who just moments ago told me I was an ugly mistake who never belonged in her family. The woman who poured her own son a glass of poisoned bourbon with a smile on her face. When she locks eyes with Julian, the blood completely drains from her features. Her skin turns a sickly, translucent shade of gray, making her look much older than her carefully maintained appearance usually allows. The utter shock hits her nervous system so violently that her legs give out beneath her. She collapses heavily backward into her executive leather chair. Her hands fly up to her chest, her manicured fingers clutching the fabric of her expensive dress right over her heart. She is gasping for air, her chest heaving as genuine, unadulterated terror floods her body. She thought she committed the perfect murder. She thought she was hours away from gaining control of a $30 million corporate death benefit. She had spent the last week sipping vintage wine by the Eiffel Tower, congratulating herself on a flawlessly executed assassination. Now her murdered son is standing 10 feet away, watching her suffocate on her own panic. Jamal looks like a man who has just been handed a death sentence. He pushes his chair back so violently it tips over and crashes to the floor. He backs away from the table, his hands raised instinctively as if bracing for a physical blow. The sweat that had coated his forehead in the hospital hallway returns instantly, dripping down the sides of his face. He knows exactly what Julian's presence means. He knows the Chicago syndicate debt is not going to be paid by an insurance policy. He knows the $30 million he borrowed from ruthless criminals is still hanging over his head, and those men do not offer payment plans. He knows he is a dead man walking. Calvin is the only one who tries to maintain a shred of control. He stands up from the head of the table, his face a complex mixture of shock, confusion, and desperate calculation. He grips the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning stark white against the dark wood. He opens his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer some ridiculous explanation or demand to know what the federal agents are doing in his building. But the words completely fail him. The powerful, commanding patriarch who ruled his family through fear and financial manipulation is reduced to a silent, trembling old man. Julian does not rush. He walks slowly and deliberately into the room. His footsteps are the only sound breaking the horrific silence. The federal agents fan out, taking positions by the glass walls and the locked doors, creating a physical perimeter that screams of absolute authority. They do not draw their weapons, but their hands rest comfortably near their holsters. Agent Davis stands near the projector screen, her eyes sweeping over the terrified family members, taking mental inventory of their guilt. Julian walks past Jamal, completely ignoring his brother's panicked, erratic breathing. He walks past Chloe, stepping right over the shattered pieces of her coffee mug, the crunch of ceramic under his expensive dress shoes echoing loudly in the tense atmosphere. He stops directly in front of Calvin. Calvin takes a slow, terrified step backward, yielding the space without a single word of protest. Julian calmly pulls out the high-backed leather chair at the absolute head of the table. He unbuttons his suit jacket, sits down, and crosses one leg over the other. He folds his hands on the polished wood, mirroring the exact posture I had taken just minutes before. The symmetry of the moment is perfectly poetic. He looks at me, and for a fraction of a second, the coldness in his eyes softens. A silent message passes between us, a shared acknowledgement of the sheer hell we had navigated to reach this exact second in time. We built this trap together, and now we get to watch it snap shut. Julian slowly turns his head, shifting his gaze away from me and locking his eyes dead onto Beatrice. She is still clutching her chest, her breathing ragged and shallow. She looks like a trapped animal, realizing the cage door has been locked from the outside. The silence in the room is heavy, oppressive, thick with the undeniable weight of impending doom. Julian leans forward, slightly resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He tilts his head, studying his mother with an expression of cold, clinical disgust. "How is Paris, mother?" Julian asks, his voice smooth, resonant, and dripping with lethal calm. "I heard the champagne pairs beautifully with attempted murder." The words hang in the air like a guillotine dropping. Beatrice lets out a sharp, pathetic whimper, shrinking back into her chair, as if she has been physically struck. Calvin drops heavily into the seat beside her, burying his face in his trembling hands, completely defeated by the reality of his ruined legacy. Jamal presses his back flat against the glass wall of the boardroom, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked doors, looking for a way out that does not exist. Chloe starts to cry, a high, panicked, whimpering sound that echoes pitifully in the large room. They are completely surrounded by federal agents trapped in a room with the man they tried to slaughter. Total suffocating panic erupts as the family realizes they are hopelessly cornered. I watch as the perfect wealthy family violently tears itself apart. The racism, the classism, the arrogance that they wielded against me for years has completely inverted. They are ripping each other to shreds in front of federal authorities, confessing to fraud and conspiracy just to drag the others down with them. It is the most beautiful structural collapse I have ever witnessed. Calvin realizes the argument is sinking them deeper. He takes a deep, ragged breath, straightening his suit jacket in a pathetic attempt to reassert his patriarchal dominance. He looks at Agent Davis, holding up his hands in a gesture of corporate diplomacy. "Agent, listen to me," Calvin says, his voice dripping with desperate authority. "This is simply an internal family dispute that has gotten severely out of hand. Yes, there are financial irregularities. Yes, mistakes were made, but we are a privately held company. Beatrice, Jamal, and I still hold the majority voting shares of this firm. We can liquidate the entire commercial portfolio today. We can pay off these unauthorized private creditors, settle the insurance misunderstanding, and resolve this entirely within the family trust. We have the assets to make this right." He honestly believes he can buy his way out of an attempted murder charge. He believes that because his name is on the building, the rules of reality do not apply to him. Julian, who has been sitting in absolute terrifying silence this entire time, finally moves. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany table. A cold, absolute smile touches his lips. Julian does not raise his voice. He does not yell. He simply reaches down to the floor beside his chair and lifts a thick black leather legal binder. He drops it onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoes through the silent boardroom like a judge striking a wooden gavel. "You do not own a single thing in this building, Calvin," Julian says, his voice stripping away the absolute last remnants of his father's arrogant dignity. "You do not own a single share. You do not own a single brick of this corporate headquarters. And you certainly do not own the leverage to negotiate your way out of a murder charge." Calvin stares at the black binder, his hands shaking violently where they rest on the polished wood. "What are you talking about?" Calvin demands, though the volume of his voice has completely evaporated into a hollow, breathless rasp. "We hold the majority voting rights. You cannot simply erase our equity." "I did not erase it," Julian replies, leaning back in his leather chair with a posture of absolute unbothered authority. "You erased it yourselves the moment you breached your fiduciary duties and attempted to assassinate the chief executive officer. When I took over this firm 5 years ago, I had the legal team draft a very specific corporate restructuring clause. It states that any board member found guilty of gross financial misconduct, embezzlement, or criminal conspiracy against the firm immediately forfeits their shares back to the corporate treasury." Beatrice lets out a sharp, trembling gasp. "You cannot do that. We are your family. We built this company long before you were even born." "Family does not serve neurotoxins with Sunday roast, mother." Julian fires back, his eyes narrowing into cold, lethal slits. "And you did not build this company. You inherited it and then you bled it completely dry to fund your ridiculous, lavish lifestyle. But to answer your question, yes, I can do that, and I already did. Julian taps the heavy black binder. When Maya obtained the shadow ledgers on Wednesday night, she handed my legal team the undeniable proof of your massive embezzlement. While I was lying in a secure medical safe house fighting off the poison you fed me, my attorneys triggered the emergency dissolution clause. It was executed, signed by a federal judge, and filed with the state registry yesterday morning. The color entirely drains from Calvin's face. The powerful, commanding patriarch who ruled his family through fear and financial manipulation is reduced to a silent, trembling old man. His mouth opens, but his vocal cords refuse to work. He realizes he has just been completely outplayed by his own son. Julian looks at his brother, who is still huddled against the glass wall of the boardroom. You borrowed $30 million from a ruthless Chicago syndicate, Jamal. You forged my signature and put up our home, my personal accounts, and Maya's architectural firm as collateral. But investigators have documented that those guarantees were executed with forged signatures, and our attorneys have already challenged any attempt to enforce them against Maya, me, or our legitimate personal assets. Those forged guarantees do not give your creditors a lawful claim to our property. Jamal starts hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he grabs his own hair in sheer, unadulterated panic. The syndicate will kill us. Jamal cries out, his voice cracking with a frantic, animalistic terror. They will kill us. If we have no shares, we have no money. If we have no money, they will come for us. They will hunt us down. Julian looks at his younger brother with zero pity. That sounds like a personal problem, Jamal. Federal investigators have obtained orders restraining the accounts and assets they have already traced to the suspected criminal proceeds. You cannot move the offshore money, sell the Hamptons property, or liquidate the investment accounts while the case is pending. The assets you thought would save you are now locked inside the investigation. The reality of their destruction crashes down on the room with the force of a falling skyscraper. I sit beside my husband, watching the immaculate, wealthy family violently tear itself apart as the absolute gravity of their situation settles over them. They are not just broke, they are exposed. They have $30 million in illegal syndicate debt and absolutely no way to pay it. The very criminals they borrowed money from are currently hunting them down, and they have lost every single shield of wealth and privilege that previously protected them. Chloe completely loses her mind. The entitled, condescending smirk she wore for 7 years is replaced by a desperate, ugly panic. Her white privilege is failing her in a room full of federal agents, and she does not know how to handle the sudden loss of power. She lunges across the mahogany table toward Julian, knocking aside the stack of fake severance papers she had tried to force me to sign. Julian, please, Chloe screams, tears of mascara streaming down her pale face. We are family. You cannot do this to me. I was just doing what Jamal told me to do. Maya, tell him I am innocent. Please, you have to help me. I stand up from my chair, looking down at the woman who had made my life a living hell. You told me I was a ghetto charity case, Chloe. I say, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. You told me to take 2 million fake dollars and crawl back to the south side of Chicago. You told me I was an ugly outsider who never belonged at this table. You do not get to play the innocent victim now. You poured the poison just as surely as Beatrice did. Beatrice covers her face with her trembling hands, letting out a loud, pathetic wail. She realizes she is going to a federal prison where her pearls, her designer mourning dresses, and her high society status mean absolutely nothing. She is going to be locked in a concrete cell, stripped of everything that gave her an identity. Calvin stares blankly at the polished wood of the boardroom table. The empire he thought he controlled has been completely liquidated. He thought he could buy his way out of an attempted murder charge. He thought his name on the side of the building made him invincible. Now he is just a broke, disgraced criminal waiting to be hauled away in handcuffs. Jamal is practically sobbing against the glass wall. For him, a federal penitentiary is actually the safest place he can possibly be. It is the only place the Chicago syndicate cannot easily reach him. The poetic irony of his situation is stunning. He is going to beg the judge to lock him away just to hide from the monsters he invited into their lives. Agent Davis, the lead FBI investigator, steps forward from her position near the projector screen. She has seen enough. The confessions are recorded, the financial documents are secured, the structural collapse is entirely complete. That is enough, Agent Davis announces, her voice slicing cleanly through the chaotic sobbing and panicked breathing of my in-laws. She signals to the armed tactical agent standing by the locked oak doors. Calvin, Beatrice, Jamal, and Chloe, Agent Davis states, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, massive corporate embezzlement, and insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The federal agents do not hesitate. They move with the swift, practiced efficiency of a demolition crew bringing down a condemned building. The heavy steel handcuffs latch around Calvin's wrists first. The sharp metallic click echoes through the boardroom, officially signaling the end of his tyrannical reign. Calvin does not fight them. He just stares blankly at the mahogany table, his jaw slack, finally understanding that his empire has been completely liquidated. His name on the side of the building cannot protect him from the federal government. Next, they secure Beatrice. The matriarch who had spent the last 7 years making sure I knew I was a working-class outsider from the south side of Chicago is roughly pulled from her custom leather chair. She lets out a dramatic, breathless shriek as her wrists are forced behind her back. The luxurious black designer mourning dress she bought specifically to wear to her son's funeral is now nothing more than the outfit she will wear during her mugshot. She looks wildly around the room, demanding someone call her private attorney, but her demands fall on completely deaf ears. The agents read her Miranda rights in a flat, monotone voice listing conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud as if they are reading items off a grocery list. Jamal offers no resistance at all. When the agent grabs his shoulder, Jamal practically sags in relief. The cold steel around his wrists is the only guarantee he has that the Chicago syndicate will not find him tonight. He mumbles incoherently, his eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors, eager to be placed in the protective custody of a federal holding cell. His massive embezzlement scheme has bought him a one-way ticket to a concrete box, but right now, that concrete box is his only sanctuary. But Chloe is an entirely different story. My white sister-in-law is hyperventilating. Her chest heaves violently under her expensive black dress. The immense privilege that has shielded her for her entire life is actively failing her, and she has absolutely no idea how to process the reality of facing federal prison. She thrashes weakly as the female FBI agent secures the cuffs around her wrists. The sharp metal bites into her pale skin, forcing her hands together in front of her. She spins around her tear-streaked face, searching frantically for a lifeline. She looks at Jamal, but he is staring at the floor. She looks at Calvin and Beatrice, but they are paralyzed by their own impending destruction. Finally, her wide, panicked eyes lock onto me. Maya! Chloe sobs, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. She stumbles forward, the federal agent keeping a firm grip on her bicep. Maya, please. You have to tell them I had nothing to do with the poison. I didn't want to kill Julian. I'm just a mother. I have a life. I have charities. You can't let them take me to jail. We are family. I look at her, my face, a mask of absolute impenetrable calm. I do not feel a single ounce of pity. I feel the profound, grounding satisfaction of justice taking its natural course. I walk slowly around the edge of the mahogany table, my heels clicking deliberately against the polished marble floor. I stop right in front of Chloe. The FBI agent holds her steady, allowing me the space to deliver my final address. You stopped being family the moment you booked that first-class ticket to Paris, Chloe. I say, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. You wanted the payout, you wanted the lifestyle, you wanted the prestige. You just didn't want to get your hands dirty, but you are covered in the exact same poison as the rest of them. I reach into my black leather tote bag. My fingers brush past the cloned hard drives and the printed toxicology reports. I reach into the small zippered pocket on the side and pull out a single golden coin. During my trip to the hospital cafeteria 3 days ago, I received strange change from the automated coffee machine. Mixed in with the American quarters was a single €1 coin, likely dropped by a traveling doctor or a careless visitor. I had kept it in my purse, a random piece of metal. Now it is the absolute perfect instrument for my final response. I hold the euro coin up between my thumb and index finger. It catches the harsh glare of the projector light shining brilliantly in the dim boardroom. Chloe stares at it, her crying, pausing for a fraction of a second as total confusion washes over her tear-stained face. I reach out and gently drop the coin directly into her shackled, trembling hands. It lands against the cold steel of her handcuffs with a sharp, resonant clink. A little souvenir from your healing trip, I say, my tone dropping to a deadly quiet frequency. Try Uber to the precinct. Chloe lets out a devastating, horrific wail. The sheer poetry of the insult completely breaks her. It is the exact same phrase her husband's family had used to dismiss me in the past, inverted and weaponized against her in her darkest moment. Let's go, Agent Davis commands, signaling the tactical team to initiate the extraction. I stand next to Julian as the federal agents march my in-laws out of the boardroom. Beatrice goes first, hiding her face behind her thick black veil to avoid the stares of the corporate employees waiting in the hallways outside. Calvin follows her, his head bowed, his legacy entirely in ruins. Jamal shuffles behind them, looking like a hollow shell of a man. Chloe brings up the rear, crying, hysterically clutching the single euro coin in her bound hands as she is paraded past the glass walls of the executive floor. The heavy oak doors swing shut behind them. The deadbolt clicks open, then locks again as the tactical team secures the perimeter outside. The room falls completely silent. The chaotic, suffocating energy that had filled the boardroom for the past hour entirely evaporates. The projector hums softly behind us, still displaying the audio file of the syndicate enforcer's threat. I reach over and unplug my tablet. The massive screen goes dark. I press a button on the wall console, and the heavy blackout blinds slowly rise, flooding the boardroom with bright, natural morning light. I turn to look at my husband. Julian is standing near the head of the table, running a hand over the back of the leather chair. The color has returned to his face, though the physical toll of fighting the neurotoxin is still evident in the tight lines around his eyes. He looks at me, letting out a long, shuddering breath. "It is over," Julian says, his voice thick with raw emotion. I walk over to him, wrapping my arms tightly around his waist. He pulls me into his chest, resting his chin on the top of my head. His heartbeat is strong, steady, and beautiful against my ear. I close my eyes, letting the reality of our survival wash over me. We beat them. We exposed their greed, dismantled their empire, and secured our own future. We stand together by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, the very window I had designed to showcase the stunning Seattle skyline. Down below on the rain-slicked street, we watch the sequence of events unfold. The corporate employees are gathered on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering as 4 marked police cruisers and 2 black federal SUVs idle at the curb. We watch as Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, and Chloe are escorted out of the building. Their hands are cuffed behind their backs. The local news vans have already arrived, tipped off by the massive federal presence. Cameras are flashing, capturing the spectacular, highly publicized downfall of one of the city's most prominent real estate families. They are shoved into the back of the police cruisers, the doors slamming shut on their lavish, privileged lives forever. The sirens flare to life, a chorus of high-pitched wails cutting through the morning air. The convoy pulls away from the curb, merging into the heavy city traffic, carrying the toxic ashes of Julian's family away for good. "What happens now?" I ask quietly, keeping my arms wrapped securely around him. Julian looks down at me, a profound sense of peace settling over his features. "Now we liquidate this entire toxic structure," he says, his voice filled with quiet determination. "As the sole remaining shareholder untainted by criminal fraud, I have the legal authority to dissolve the corporation entirely. Federal investigators will trace and restrain the criminal proceeds, while the courts determine restitution for legitimate victims and creditors. The syndicate debt is Jamal's problem. The forged guarantees do not give those criminals a legitimate claim to our personal assets. Whatever clean, legitimate capital remains legally belongs to us." He turns me slightly, so we are both looking out at the vast expanse of the city. "I do not want to rebuild my father's empire," Julian continues. "I want to build ours. You are the most brilliant commercial architect I have ever known, Maya. You designed this building, and today you proved you know exactly how to tear a corrupt foundation down to the studs. I want us to start a new firm together, just you and me. We build it on our own terms, with our own money, and with absolute integrity." A deep, resonant warmth spreads through my chest. For 7 years, I had tried to prove my worth to a family that was fundamentally incapable of recognizing it. I had tried to earn my seat at a table that was built on theft, arrogance, and cruelty. But looking out at the city we are about to conquer, I realize I never needed their validation. I never needed their table. I had the power to build my own table all along. "We will call it Apex Commercial Design," I say, letting a genuine, radiant smile spread across my face. "Apex," Julian repeats, testing the word. He smiles, a real full smile that reaches all the way to his eyes. "I like the sound of that. It implies we are at the absolute top." "We are at the top, Julian," I reply, resting my head against his shoulder. The rain has finally stopped. The thick gray clouds that had choked the Seattle sky for the past 3 days are breaking apart, revealing bright patches of vivid blue. The storm is officially over. My in-laws are sitting in the back of federal transport vehicles, completely stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their false dignity. They are facing attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement charges, serious enough to ensure they never see the outside of a prison wall again. They sought to bury us. Instead, they dug their own graves. We turn away from the window. We leave the heavy oak doors of the boardroom open. We walk out of the executive suite, leaving the mahogany table, the leather chairs, and the toxic history of his family completely behind us. We step into the private elevator and ride down to the main lobby, our hands tightly intertwined. We walk out of the building and into the crisp, clean morning air. We are free of their debt, free of their judgment, and free of their poison. We are stepping into a future funded by clean wealth grounded in genuine loyalty and built on a foundation that can never be broken. We are rich, we are safe, and most importantly, we are truly alive. That is enough, Agent Davis announces, her voice slicing cleanly through the chaotic sobbing and panicked breathing of my in-laws. She signals to the armed tactical agent standing by the locked oak doors. Calvin, Beatrice, Jamal, and Chloe, Agent Davis states, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, massive corporate embezzlement, and insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The federal agents do not hesitate. They move with the swift, practiced efficiency of a demolition crew bringing down a condemned building. The heavy steel handcuffs latch around Calvin's wrists first. The sharp metallic click echoes through the boardroom, officially signaling the end of his tyrannical reign. Calvin does not fight them. He just stares blankly at the mahogany table, his jaw slack, finally understanding that his empire has been completely liquidated. His name on the side of the building cannot protect him from the federal government. Next, they secure Beatrice. The matriarch who had spent the last 7 years making sure I knew I was a working-class outsider from the south side of Chicago is roughly pulled from her custom leather chair. She lets out a dramatic, breathless shriek as her wrists are forced behind her back. The luxurious black designer mourning dress she bought specifically to wear to her son's funeral is now nothing more than the outfit she will wear during her mugshot. She looks wildly around the room, demanding someone call her private attorney, but her demands fall on completely deaf ears. The agents read her Miranda rights in a flat, monotone voice, listing conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud as if they are reading items off a grocery list. Jamal offers no resistance at all. When the agent grabs his shoulder, Jamal practically sags in relief. The cold steel around his wrists is the only guarantee he has that the Chicago syndicate will not find him tonight. He mumbles incoherently, his eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors, eager to be placed in the protective custody of a federal holding cell. His massive embezzlement scheme has bought him a one-way ticket to a concrete box, but right now, that concrete box is his only sanctuary. But Chloe is an entirely different story. My white sister-in-law is hyperventilating. Her chest heaves violently under her expensive black dress. The immense privilege that has shielded her for her entire life is actively failing her, and she has absolutely no idea how to process the reality of facing federal prison. She thrashes weakly as the female FBI agent secures the cuffs around her wrists. The sharp metal bites into her pale skin, forcing her hands together in front of her. She spins around, her tear-streaked face, searching frantically for a lifeline. She looks at Jamal, but he is staring at the floor. She looks at Calvin and Beatrice, but they are paralyzed by their own impending destruction. Finally, her wide, panicked eyes lock onto me. Maya! Chloe sobs, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. She stumbles forward, the federal agent keeping a firm grip on her bicep. Maya, please. You have to tell them I had nothing to do with the poison. I didn't want to kill Julian. I'm just a mother. I have a life. I have charities. You can't let them take me to jail. We are family. I look at her, my face a mask of absolute impenetrable calm. I do not feel a single ounce of pity. I feel the profound, grounding satisfaction of justice taking its natural course. I walk slowly around the edge of the mahogany table, my heels clicking deliberately against the polished marble floor. I stop right in front of Chloe. The FBI agent holds her steady, allowing me the space to deliver my final address. You stopped being family the moment you booked that first-class ticket to Paris, Chloe. I say, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. You wanted the payout, you wanted the lifestyle, you wanted the prestige. You just didn't want to get your hands dirty, but you are covered in the exact same poison as the rest of them. I reach into my black leather tote bag. My fingers brush past the cloned hard drives and the printed toxicology reports. I reach into the small zippered pocket on the side and pull out a single golden coin. During my trip to the hospital cafeteria 3 days ago, I received strange change from the automated coffee machine. Mixed in with the American quarters was a single €1 coin, likely dropped by a traveling doctor or a careless visitor. I had kept it in my purse, a random piece of metal. Now it is the absolute perfect instrument for my final response. I hold the euro coin up between my thumb and index finger. It catches the harsh glare of the projector light shining brilliantly in the dim boardroom. Chloe stares at it, her crying, pausing for a fraction of a second as total confusion washes over her tear-stained face. I reach out and gently drop the coin directly into her shackled, trembling hands. It lands against the cold steel of her handcuffs with a sharp, resonant clink. A little souvenir from your healing trip, I say, my tone dropping to a deadly quiet frequency. Try Uber to the precinct. Chloe lets out a devastating, horrific wail. The sheer poetry of the insult completely breaks her. It is the exact same phrase her husband's family had used to dismiss me in the past, inverted and weaponized against her in her darkest moment. Let's go, Agent Davis commands, signaling the tactical team to initiate the extraction. I stand next to Julian as the federal agents march my in-laws out of the boardroom. Beatrice goes first, hiding her face behind her thick black veil to avoid the stares of the corporate employees waiting in the hallways outside. Calvin follows her, his head bowed, his legacy entirely in ruins. Jamal shuffles behind them, looking like a hollow shell of a man. Chloe brings up the rear, crying, hysterically clutching the single euro coin in her bound hands as she is paraded past the glass walls of the executive floor. The heavy oak doors swing shut behind them. The deadbolt clicks open, then locks again as the tactical team secures the perimeter outside. The room falls completely silent. The chaotic, suffocating energy that had filled the boardroom for the past hour entirely evaporates. The projector hums softly behind us, still displaying the audio file of the syndicate enforcer's threat. I reach over and unplug my tablet. The massive screen goes dark. I press a button on the wall console, and the heavy blackout blinds slowly rise, flooding the boardroom with bright, natural morning light. I turn to look at my husband. Julian is standing near the head of the table, running a hand over the back of the leather chair. The color has returned to his face, though the physical toll of fighting the neurotoxin is still evident in the tight lines around his eyes. He looks at me, letting out a long, shuddering breath. It is over, Julian says, his voice thick with raw emotion. I walk over to him, wrapping my arms tightly around his waist. He pulls me into his chest, resting his chin on the top of my head. His heartbeat is strong, steady, and beautiful against my ear. I close my eyes, letting the reality of our survival wash over me. We beat them. We exposed their greed, dismantled their empire, and secured our own future. We stand together by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, the very window I had designed to showcase the stunning Seattle skyline. Down below on the rain-slicked street, we watch the sequence of events unfold. The corporate employees are gathered on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering as 4 marked police cruisers and 2 black federal SUVs idle at the curb. We watch as Beatrice, Calvin, Jamal, and Chloe are escorted out of the building. Their hands are cuffed behind their backs. The local news vans have already arrived, tipped off by the massive federal presence. Cameras are flashing, capturing the spectacular, highly publicized downfall of one of the city's most prominent real estate families. They are shoved into the back of the police cruisers, the doors slamming shut on their lavish, privileged lives forever. The sirens flare to life, a chorus of high-pitched wails cutting through the morning air. The convoy pulls away from the curb, merging into the heavy city traffic, carrying the toxic ashes of Julian's family away for good. What happens now? I ask quietly, keeping my arms wrapped securely around him. Julian looks down at me, a profound sense of peace settling over his features. Now we liquidate this entire toxic structure, he says, his voice filled with quiet determination. As the sole remaining shareholder untainted by criminal fraud, I have the legal authority to dissolve the corporation entirely. Federal investigators will trace and restrain the criminal proceeds, while the courts determine restitution for legitimate victims and creditors. The syndicate debt is Jamal's problem. The forged guarantees do not give those criminals a legitimate claim to our personal assets. Whatever clean, legitimate capital remains legally belongs to us. He turns me slightly, so we are both looking out at the vast expanse of the city. I do not want to rebuild my father's empire, Julian continues. I want to build ours. You are the most brilliant commercial architect I have ever known, Maya. You designed this building, and today you proved you know exactly how to tear a corrupt foundation down to the studs. I want us to start a new firm together. Just you and me. We build it on our own terms, with our own money, and with absolute integrity. A deep, resonant warmth spreads through my chest. For 7 years, I had tried to prove my worth to a family that was fundamentally incapable of recognizing it. I had tried to earn my seat at a table that was built on theft, arrogance, and cruelty. But looking out at the city we are about to conquer, I realize I never needed their validation. I never needed their table. I had the power to build my own table all along. We will call it Apex Commercial Design, I say, letting a genuine, radiant smile spread across my face. Apex, Julian repeats, testing the word. He smiles a real full smile that reaches all the way to his eyes. I like the sound of that. It implies we are at the absolute top. We are at the top, Julian, I reply, resting my head against his shoulder. The rain has finally stopped. The thick gray clouds that had choked the Seattle sky for the past 3 days are breaking apart, revealing bright patches of vivid blue. The storm is officially over. My in-laws are sitting in the back of federal transport vehicles, completely stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their false dignity. They are facing attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement charges, serious enough to ensure they never see the outside of a prison wall again. They sought to bury us. Instead, they dug their own graves. We turn away from the window. We leave the heavy oak doors of the boardroom open. We walk out of the executive suite, leaving the mahogany table, the leather chairs, and the toxic history of his family completely behind us. We step into the private elevator and ride down to the main lobby, our hands tightly intertwined. We walk out of the building and into the crisp, clean morning air. We are free of their debt, free of their judgment, and free of their poison. We are stepping into a future funded by clean wealth, grounded in genuine loyalty, and built on a foundation that can never be broken. We are rich, we are safe, and most importantly, we are truly alive.